This video continues with 75. Chapter 75, Kimiko Miyashiro, 1 bonus chapter. Reborn in the boys with a plunder system. My target is Homelander. 75, Chapter 75, Kimiko Miyashiro, 1 bonus chapter. Perspective, Arian Spencer, penthouse. The scent of toasted sesame oil and searing garlic filled the penthouse kitchen, a rich aroma that completely masked the filtered air of the city high above. I stood at the massive marble island, a freshly sharpened chef's knife in my hand, reducing a handful of scallions into perfectly uniform green rings. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the blade against the wooden cutting board was meditative. Beside me, Kimiko was humming. It was a low sound, a melody she was testing out in the back of her throat. She wore a pair of dark leggings and a loose white t-shirt, her hair tied back in a messy bun, completely absorbed in stirring a pan of sizzling ginger and soy-marinated chicken. BZZT. The familiar vibration of the plundering system echoed directly into my frontal lobe. "Morning, boss, hope you're hungry," the system's voice chimed, radiating a digital satisfaction. The red unit just clocked out. They pulled an all-nighter and the haul is absolutely biblical. You want the receipt. I scooped the chopped scallions into a small ceramic bowl. Run it, I thought. The holographic blue interface materialized in my vision, floating seamlessly over the kitchen counter, translucent enough that I could still see Kimiko stirring the chicken through the glowing text. Plunder queue processing. Operation, Victoria Neumann black site. Soup neutralized, Victoria Newman Tier 2, power hemokinesis. Choose option, retain or convert. Victoria Newman, the head popper, the political weapon Stan Edgar had kept in his back pocket. Convert, I commanded. I already possessed the superior Tier 1 biokinesis. I didn't need her blood tricks. Converting power, hemokinesis Tier 2. Conversion complete, plus 3000 XP. Operation, VOUGHT agriculture, animal testing. Soups neutralized, 1x biospike canine Tier 4, 1x kinetic rodent Tier 4, 14x telekinetic arachnids Tier 5. Choose option, retain or convert. I almost smirked at the absurdity of it. Vought's desperation to test Compound V had created a literal petting zoo of nightmares. Convert all. Converting animal subjects. Conversion complete, plus 2400 XP. Operation, the WOODS, GODOLKIN University. Processing 21 subjects, mix of Tier 3, Tier 4, Tier 5. Convert them all. Converting. Conversion complete, plus 15600 XP. The notifications finally ceased, compiling into a grand total that glowed brightly in the center of my vision. Harvest complete. Previous balance, 56,600 XP. Total XP GAINED, 24,000 XP. Current total XP, 80,600. I swept my hand through the air, dismissing the interface. Arian. I turned my head. Kimiko had lowered the heat on the stove. She was holding a wooden spoon, looking at me with her perceptive eyes. "You went far away again," she said softly. "Just thinking about logistics again," I replied smoothly, offering a warm smile. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and took a step closer to the island, leaning against the cool marble. "Can I ask for help?" she asked. I set the chef's knife down and turned to give her my full attention. "Of course." She looked down at her hands, her fingers picking nervously at a loose thread on the hem of her shirt. "My brother, Kenji." The name hung in the air between us. "I need to find him," she continued. "The Shining Light Liberation Army? They took us both. We were separated. You saved me from the basement, but Kenji is still out there. The terrorists might have him. I don't know, but I want to rescue him." She looked up, her eyes shining with a desperate vulnerability. "Can you help me?" "Yes." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secure smartphone. I tapped the screen, dialing the encrypted line to the Spencer Industries executive suite. I set the phone on the marble counter and tapped the speaker icon. It rang exactly once. Director Spencer, the professional voice of Jonathan Sterling, echoed from the speaker. It was my clone, wearing the stolen face and memories of my former CFO, operating the legal side of my empire. Jonathan, I said, keeping my tone authoritative, I need a high-priority locator run initiated immediately. Off the books. Understood, sir, Clone replied without missing a beat. Please provide the search parameters. Name, facial features, known affiliations, and last approximate location. I looked across the island at Kimiko. I gestured toward the phone with an open palm. Kimiko leaned closer to the phone, her hands gripping the edge of the marble. His name is Kenji Miyashiro, she said, her voice steadying. He is Japanese, 23 years old. He was taken by the Shining Light Liberation Army, a terrorist group operating in the Philippines, but they smuggle people into the United States. He works for them or is a prisoner of them. I do not know. Noted, the clone's voice replied smoothly. Can you provide specific physical identifiers? Black hair, dark eyes, she continued. She paused, looking up at my face, tracing my jawline with her eyes. He has a thin scar on the left side of his jaw. We will allocate all necessary resources immediately, the clone confirmed. Keep me updated by the hour, Jonathan, I instructed. Noted, sir. The line clicked dead. The kitchen was silent again, save for the low simmer of the chicken on the stove. Kimiko let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping 2 inches as a massive weight seemed to lift from her frame. She looked at me, a profound sense of relief washing over her sharp features. Thank you, she whispered. We'll find him, Kimiko, I promised. If he's on this continent, my network will flag him. She smiled, a mischievous glint suddenly replacing the heavy sorrow in her eyes. She tilted her head, a playful smirk curving her lips. So she said, how can I repay you? I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. I matched her smirk. Well, I said, keeping my voice light, my security detail is pretty expensive. The satellite time alone costs millions. You could always just offer yourself in repayment. We both laughed. It was a comfortable sound that bounced off the stainless steel appliances. But as the laughter faded, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. The air suddenly felt thicker. Kimiko stopped laughing. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, tracking the movement of my chest as I breathed. She took a step around the kitchen island. Really? She asked. I swallowed, my own pulse suddenly accelerating, hammering a rapid rhythm against my ribs. I was just joking, I said. She took another step. She was close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from her body, close enough to smell the vanilla of her shampoo mixed with the savory scent of ginger. I'm not, she whispered. She reached up, her hands tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck, and pulled my face down to hers. She kissed me. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 76, Chapter 76, Kimiko Miyashiro 2. Warning, the following section contains adult content intended for mature readers only. Ha ha ha. Her lips crashed against mine with the raw hunger of someone who had been starved of touch for a decade. My surprise lasted for exactly 1 microsecond. I responded instantly. My hands dropped to her waist, gripping the soft fabric of her hoodie. I pulled her flush against my chest. Her mouth opened under mine, the taste of her intoxicating. My enhanced senses dialed into the moment with excruciating clarity. I could feel the frantic beat of her heart against my sternum. I could feel the dense muscle of her back under my fingertips. Without breaking the kiss, I reached out blindly with my left hand, my fingers brushing the dials of the stove. Click. Click. I killed the gas. The sizzling of the chicken faded away. I slid my hands down her waist, gripping the backs of her thighs. With a single motion fueled by my strength, I hoisted her into the air. She gasped into my mouth, her legs instinctively wrapping around my waist, locking her ankles at the small of my back. Her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, holding on as if I were the only solid thing in the world. I walked us out of the kitchen, our mouths still fused together, a tangle of limbs and escalating heat. We moved through the dining area and into the vast expanse of the living room. I fell forward, dropping us onto the deep cushioned leather sofa. I landed on top of her, my weight supported by my forearms to avoid crushing her, though her own enhanced biology could easily take it. She looked up at me, her chest heaving, her eyes dark and dilated with want. She grabbed the hem of my t-shirt, pulling it upward. I sat back on my heels, stripping the shirt over my head and tossing it carelessly across the room. Her eyes dragged over the sculpted musculature of my chest and abdomen, a hungry sound escaping her throat. I reached down, gripping the hem of her oversized hoodie. She raised her arms and I pulled the heavy fabric over her head, discarding it onto the floor. She wasn't wearing a bra. Her bare skin was warm and flushed, her breasts rising and falling rapidly with her breaths. I leaned down, pressing my lips to the sensitive skin of her neck, right over her pulse point. She arched her back, a raspy moan vibrating against my mouth as her hands dug into my shoulders, her short nails scraping lightly against my impervious skin. I hooked my fingers into the waistband of her leggings, sliding them down over her hips and pulling them down her athletic legs in one swift motion. She kicked them away, leaving her entirely bare beneath me. I stood up just long enough to shed my joggers, kicking them aside. When I knelt back down between her parted thighs, the leather of the sofa squeaked softly under our combined weight. She reached up, her hands framing my face. She pulled me down for another kiss, her tongue tracing my lower lip. I ran my hands along the curve of her waist, trailing down the swell of her hips, marveling at the perfect strength of her form. My touch was firm, mapping the contours of a woman who was as much a warrior as she was a survivor. My fingers brushed the damp heat at her center, and she bucked upward, a sharp intake of breath signaling her readiness. I shifted my weight, settling perfectly between her legs. I guided myself to her, holding her intense gaze. "Kimiko," I whispered, asking the silent question. She nodded, her hands gripping my biceps tightly. I pushed forward, entering her slowly. She let out a long breath, her eyes fluttering shut as her body stretched to accommodate me. She was impossibly tight, her internal muscles clenching around me in a wave of wet, enveloping heat that sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to my spine. I stopped, letting her adjust. We were pressed chest to chest, skin on skin. The contrast between the cool baseline of my cryokinetically cooled blood and the fiery heat of her body was intoxicating. She opened her eyes, looking up at me. She lifted her hips, pulling me deeper inside her. That was the only invitation I needed. I began to move. I established a slow rhythm, pulling almost completely out before driving back into the hilt. The friction was a maddening sensation. The leather sofa groaned in protest beneath us with every downward thrust. Her legs remained locked securely around my waist, her heels digging into my lower back, anchoring me to her. Her hands moved constantly, trailing down my spine, gripping my shoulders, tangling in my hair. "Arian," she rasped, my name escaping her lips like a prayer. The sound of her voice shattered the last of my restraint. I increased the pace, my hips snapping forward with powerful thrusts. She met me blow for blow, her own superhuman strength rising to match mine. She arched her back off the cushions, pressing her breasts against my chest, her mouth finding my neck, biting down lightly on my shoulder as the pleasure mounted. The physical mechanics of the act blurred into a haze of sensory overload. The sound of our slick bodies slapping together, the ragged breaths filling the quiet room, the scent of sweat in the air. I slid my hands under her lower back, lifting her hips higher off the sofa to change the angle, allowing me to drive impossibly deep. She threw her head back into the cushions, a loud cry tearing from her throat as I struck a sensitive nerve deep inside her. Her internal muscles began to spasm, gripping me in a frantic rhythm. She was unraveling, the tension in her body winding tighter and tighter like a coiled spring. "Arian," she cried out, her nails biting into my back. Her body went entirely rigid beneath me. A brilliant flush of red spread across her chest and neck as her climax hit her in a wave of violent tremors. Her inner walls milked me with a crushing force. The intense pressure of her climax dragged me right over the edge with her. I let out a low groan, driving my hips forward one final time, pinning her to the leather as my own release tore through me in a hot rush. I collapsed forward, my chest resting heavily against hers, burying my face in the crook of her neck. My heart was pounding, a deafening drumbeat in my ears. We lay there in the tangled, our breathing slowly returning to normal. I pressed a soft kiss to her collarbone, then slowly pushed myself up on my forearms to look at her. Her hair was wild, her skin flushed, her eyes half closed and heavy with a sated contentment. She looked beautiful. She reached up, tracing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. A soft smile curved her lips. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 77, Chapter 77, Stan Edgar bonus chapter, Vought Tower. Edgar sat perfectly still behind his desk. He was staring at the blank screen of his secure terminal, his mind running through 1,000 contingency plans. The shrill trill of the secure red phone resting on the corner of his desk shattered the quiet like a gunshot. Edgar's eyes shifted toward the device. The red phone bypassed all executive assistance and screening protocols. Only 3 people had the clearance to ring that specific line. He reached out, his movements unhurried. He lifted the heavy receiver and brought it to his ear. "Speak," Edgar said, his baritone voice a flat surface. "Mr. Edgar." The voice belonged to the head of Vought's elite cleanup division. The man was breathing heavily, his words clipped. "Sir, I am calling from the private residence of Congresswoman Victoria Newman." Edgar's hand tightened around the plastic receiver. "And," Edgar prompted. "She is deceased, sir." The silence stretched. Edgar stared at the dark reflection of himself in the unlit computer monitor. Victoria, his adopted daughter. The weapon he had groomed for decades to secure Vought's absolute control over the highest echelons of the United States government. "Cause of death," Edgar demanded, his voice dropping slightly in pitch. "Severe cranial trauma," Cleaner reported, a tremor of genuine horror leaking into his professional tone. "Sir, her skull was completely crushed, driven into the concrete floor. Furthermore, her right leg was shattered at the knee joint. The door to her private subterranean laboratory was ripped from its hinges. Dr. Samir Shah is also deceased." "The research?" Edgar asked. "Gone, sir. The cold storage units physically vanished. The servers were wiped and the entire laboratory was subsequently incinerated with a military-grade thermite charge. We barely put the fire out before it reached the main house. It looks exactly like Sage Grove, sir." A heavy stone settled into the pit of Edgar's stomach. "Lock the property down," Edgar ordered, his voice devoid of the grief that a normal man might feel, replaced entirely by cold fury. "Extract the bodies. Burn the rest of the house to the foundation. Tell the press it was a tragic gas leak. I want nothing left." "Understood, Mr. Edgar." Edgar lowered the receiver, placing it gently back on its cradle. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath through his nose. General Raddock. This was no longer corporate espionage. Before he could open his eyes, the red phone rang again. Edgar stared at it, he picked it up. "Yes." "Mr. Edgar, this is Site Command at the Maryland Agricultural Research Facility." A different voice barked, background alarms blaring loudly through the connection. "Sir, we have a total containment breach. The facility is on fire." "Calm yourself," Edgar commanded, his voice slicing through the man's panic. "Give me a status report. The test subjects." "Dead, sir," the man coughed, the sound of smoke evident in his lungs. "All the mammalian and avian subjects have been slaughtered in their pens. The scientists in the control room, they just butchered each other." Edgar's eyes narrowed. Telepathy. "The servers?" Edgar asked. "Literally missing from the racks. And the thermite?" "Sir, the structural integrity of the bunker is failing. We have to." "Evacuate," Edgar said and hung up the phone. He didn't have time to process the loss of the animal testing lab. The phone rang for a third time, a continuous ring that echoed off the mahogany walls. Edgar picked it up, pressing it hard against his ear. "Stan, it's Indira." Indira Shetty's voice was frantic, bordering on hysterical. The dean of Godalkin University was a woman composed of steel and ambition, but right now, she sounded like a terrified child. "Stan, it's the Woods," Shetty gasped. "The security feeds just cut out. I tried to call down, but no one is answering. And smoke? Stan, there's smoke coming up through the primary ventilation shafts on the campus lawn." Edgar stood up from his desk. The facade of the untouchable corporate monarch was fracturing under the weight of 3 simultaneous massacres. Dean Shetty, Edgar said, his voice tightening. Listen to me very carefully. You will trigger the campus-wide emergency lockdown. You will tell the students and the media that there is a localized chemical spill in the maintenance tunnels. You will deploy the campus security to keep everyone away from the ventilation shafts. But Cardossa's virus research, Shetty cried. We were so close, Stan. The contagion variations are gone, Indira, Edgar said coldly. Consider the subjects dead and the research stolen. Secure the surface. Do not let the public know what was burning beneath their children's feet. He slammed the phone down. For 5 seconds, Stan Edgar stood behind his desk, his hands resting flat on the glass surface. He breathed in, out. Edgar straightened his suit jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the door. He took the private elevator down to the sub-basement levels. The doors parted to reveal the intelligence room. The cavernous space was bathed in flashing red emergency lights. Analysts were sprinting between consoles, shouting into headsets. Graves stood at the center command table, his face illuminated by the massive digital map of the eastern seaboard. 3 pulsing red icons blazed on the map. One in D.C., one in Maryland, one under Godolkin University. Mr. Edgar, Graves said, turning as the CEO approached. Graves looked completely unraveled, his professional demeanor shattered by the sheer impossibility of the coordinated attacks. Sir, it's a synchronized triple strike. We are tracking massive data loss, total personnel casualties, and thermal blooms consistent with. I know what they are consistent with, Graves, Edgar snapped, his voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the room. The analysts closest to him flinched at the harsh tone. Show me the satellite feeds. You have the Argus grid access from Spencer Industries. Tell me you caught them. Graves swallowed hard and nodded to a technician. Bring up the orbital thermal feeds. Timestamp 200 to present. Sync with the Maryland and Godolkin coordinates. The main screen shifted. The map replaced by 2 side-by-side video feeds. They were high-resolution thermal images peering through the roofs of the respective facilities. This is Maryland, 20 minutes ago, Graves pointed to the left screen. Edgar watched as 5 bright thermal silhouettes materialized out of thin air inside the bunker. They moved with terrifying speed. He watched the heat signatures of the scientists in the control room turn on each other, hacking themselves to pieces while the 5 intruders moved through the animal pens. He watched the heavy equipment simply vanish from the thermal spectrum. And here, Graves pointed to the right screen, Godolkin University. Timestamp matches the extraction from Maryland perfectly. They teleported from one facility directly into the next. Edgar watched the 5 figures materialize in the Godolkin security hub. He saw the guards draw their weapons and shoot themselves. He watched the figures fan out down the cell block, systematically extinguishing the heat signatures of every young soup trapped inside. Isolate the thermal profiles, Edgar commanded, his hands gripping the edge of the console. Peel back the armor. Show me the faces. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 78, chapter 78, Homelander 1, bonus chapter. The technician typed furiously. The software processed the infrared data, stripping away the armored silhouettes to reveal the distinct facial geometries beneath the helmets. The software ran the facial recognition match. The same 5 military IDs flashed onto the screen. Sergeant Miller, Corporal Banks, Lieutenant Kovacs, Private Davis, Specialist Chen, General Raddock's men. It's them, Graves breathed, wiping sweat from his upper lip. They just crippled our entire clandestine R&D infrastructure in under an hour. Stan Edgar stared at the faces of the 5 soldiers. The calm demeanor that had defined his entire career finally fractured. A surge of pure hatred boiled up from his chest. These military M***S, Edgar hissed, the profanity sounding alien and jarring coming from his lips. Graves looked at him in shock. He had never heard Edgar swear. Edgar leaned over the console, his eyes blazing. They are burning my company to the ground to build their own empire. Edgar turned to Graves, his expression ruthless. We cannot tolerate this anymore. I want the tactical team deployed. I want them in the air in 5 minutes. Sir Graves stammered. A direct assault on a United States military installation? General Raddock's base is heavily fortified. If we attack them, it's an act of war against the government. They have already declared war, Graves. Edgar roared, slamming his fist onto the table. If we do not wipe this red unit off the face of the earth and retrieve that data tonight, Vought will cease to exist. You will flatten Raddock's base, you will execute those 5 soldiers, and you will bring me his head in a box. Do you understand me? Yes, Mr. Edgar, Graves said quickly, reaching for his secure comms unit. Initiating Strike Protocol Alpha. Teams moving to the helipads now. Burn them out, Edgar whispered, staring at the frozen thermal images of the 5 clones. Burn them all out. 99 floors above, the air in Conference Room A was silent. Homelander stood by the massive glass windows, looking out at the city. He was not looking at the skyline, however. His head was tilted slightly downward, his eyes unfocused. He was listening. His super hearing, capable of picking up the heartbeat of a mouse a mile away, was currently funneled straight down through the steel, concrete, and soundproofing of the Vought Tower, directly into the subterranean intelligence room. He filtered out the hum of the servers, the frantic typing of the analysts, and the blaring of the emergency alarms. He isolated the frequency of Stan Edgar's voice. He heard it all. Victoria Newman, dead, head crushed. The woods burned. General Raddock's men, the Red Unit. These military, M***S. Homelander's hands curled into tight fists. The leather of his gloves creaked loudly in the empty boardroom. The letter was right. The warning from his loyal fan was entirely accurate. The military was building an army to replace him. They had the stable Compound V, and they were systematically hunting down Vaught's assets. And Edgar had told him to wait, to smile for the cameras, to let the adults handle it. Edgar had wanted him sidelined, while these military mudcrawlers built a team of sups designed to make the 7 obsolete. A low growl started in the back of Homelander's throat. Replacing me, Homelander whispered to the glass. You think you can replace me with some grunt in a uniform? He turned away from the window. The heat behind his eyes flared, turning his irises into glowing pools of ruby fire. He wasn't going to let Edgar's human tactical team handle this. Human guards with sonic guns? It was an insult. This was a job for him. He needed to show Raddock, Edgar, and the entire world what happened when you tried to usurp the true king. He walked to the center of the table and pressed the heavy silver button on the intercom console. This is Homelander, he announced, his voice echoing through the private quarters of every member of the 7 in the tower. All members of the 7. Conference Room A right now. If you are not in this room in exactly 2 minutes, I will assume you have tendered your resignation. He released the button and waited. The doors flew open 90 seconds later. The Deep was the first to arrive, practically tripping over his own feet in his haste. His green and gold suit was slightly wrinkled, and he looked wildly around the empty room before his eyes settled on Homelander. He offered a terrified smile. Homelander, hey, buddy, I was right down the hall, always ready. A train zipped into the room a second later, the gust of wind from his super speed sending loose papers flying off the table. He vibrated with nervous energy, his eyes darting around. He was sweating despite the cool air conditioning. I'm here, boss, A-Train said quickly, leaning against a chair. What's the emergency? Queen Maeve walked in next. She looked exhausted, carrying a half-empty mug of coffee that smelled strongly of vodka. She didn't look at Homelander, simply dragging out a chair and slumping into it with a heavy sigh. She looked at the empty chair where Black Noir usually sat, a dark shadow crossing her features before she looked away. Finally, Starlight hurried through the doors. She was wearing the revealing white bodysuit Vought had mandated. She crossed her arms tightly over her exposed chest, looking highly uncomfortable and deeply afraid. She took the seat furthest from Homelander. Homelander watched them. A junkie, a sycophant, a burned-out alcoholic, and a naive farm girl. This was his team. This was what he had to work with. They were pathetic, but they were his. Sit down, Homelander commanded softly. The Deep and A-Train scrambled to pull out their chairs and sit. Homelander began to pace slowly behind his eagle-carved throne. The only sound in the room was the heavy thud, thud, thud of his red boots on the carpet. "We are under attack," Homelander began, his voice almost conversational, which only made it more terrifying. "Right now, as we speak, there is a highly lethal campaign being waged against Vought. Against us." He stopped pacing and leaned his hands on the back of his chair, looking at each of them. "I have just intercepted top-secret intelligence from Stan Edgar's private servers," Homelander lied flawlessly. "The United States military, specifically a rogue faction led by General Raddock, has acquired the stabilized formula for Compound V." A train stopped bouncing his leg. The Deep gasped. "That's right," Homelander smiled, a cruel stretching of his lips. "The mud crawlers in Washington have decided they don't need us anymore. They are secretly breeding their own army of sups. They call themselves the Red Unit. And they are very, very busy." Homelander walked slowly down the side of the table, his cape dragging silently behind him. "Tonight, they assassinated Congresswoman Victoria Newman in her home. They burned down our research facilities in Maryland. They slaughtered dozens of young sups studying at Godolkin University." He paused behind the Deep's chair. "They are eliminating our assets, stealing our research, and clearing the board, because they want to replace us. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 79, Chapter 79, Homelander 2, bonus chapter. Replace us?" The Deep squeaked, looking over his shoulder at Homelander with wide eyes. But we're the 7. We're the premier superhero team in the world. They can't just replace us." "They can, Kevin," Homelander said patronizingly, patting the Deep on the shoulder. The Deep flinched. "And they will, unless we remind them why we are the ones who rule the sky." Homelander walked to the head of the table. He slammed his fist down onto the mahogany. The wood cracked loudly, splintering under the impact. "Edgar is weak," Homelander roared, dropping the conversational tone entirely. "He wants to send a bunch of human security guards with sound guns to handle a squad of military sups. He is a coward. He treats us like products on a shelf, and he's perfectly willing to let us be discontinued if it saves his bottom line." He glared at the 4 heroes. "But I am not a product, and I am not going to sit in this tower and wait for some jarhead in black armor to come and put a bullet in my head. We are going to take the fight to them." Maeve took a sip of her spiked coffee. "Take the fight to them where, John?" "Fort Benning," Homelander said, his eyes flashing red for a brief second. "General Raddock's base of operations. The Red Unit operates out of there. We are going to fly down there, tear the base apart, find these military knockoffs, and show them what real power looks like." Starlight shot up from her chair, her hands flat on the table. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with a stubborn bravery. "Homelander, you can't be serious," Starlight said, her voice resolute. Homelander slowly turned his head to look at her. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Excuse me, Annie," he asked, his voice a deadly whisper. "You're talking about attacking a United States military base," Starlight argued, desperately trying to appeal to logic. "That's a federal installation. There are thousands of human soldiers there. If we attack them, it's an act of terrorism. It's a declaration of war against the United States government. We are supposed to be heroes, protecting the country, not fighting its army." Homelander stared at her. He began to walk toward her. The Deep pushed his chair back, trying to distance himself from the impending explosion. A train looked at the door, calculating his odds of escaping. Maeve set her mug down, her muscles tensing, preparing for the worst. Homelander stopped inches from Starlight. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She held her ground, staring up into his face, though her breathing was rapid. "A declaration of war?" Homelander repeated softly. He leaned down, his face level with hers. "Annie, darling, they already declared war. They killed our people. They are building weapons to hunt us down like animals." He reached up and gently tucked a stray blonde hair behind her ear. His touch was light, but it carried the threat of absolute violence. "You talk about the government like they are our masters," Homelander said, his eyes beginning to glow with that faint red light. "They are insects. We are gods. You think I care about treason? I am the law. I am the power." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that only she could hear. "If we sit here and do nothing, they will kill us. And if you refuse to fight for your family, Annie, if you refuse to stand with me against the people trying to destroy us." The red light in his eyes intensified, illuminating the tears welling up in Starlight's eyes. "Then I will assume you are with them," Homelander finished, "and I will deal with you right here, right now. I will burn a hole straight through your pretty little head, and I will tell the press that the red unit got to you." Starlight trembled. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but a bottomless void. He wasn't bluffing. He would kill her without a second thought. "John, stop it," Maeve said loudly, standing up and stepping between them. She placed a hand on Homelander's chest, pushing him back a fraction of an inch. "She's just scared. She doesn't understand the stakes." Homelander looked at Maeve, his eyes still glowing. For a second, it looked like he might laser Maeve as well, but Maeve held his gaze, refusing to back down. Slowly, the red light faded. Homelander took a step back, smoothing his cape. "Are you with me, Maggie?" Homelander asked, his voice challenging. "Or are you with the mud crawlers?" Maeve swallowed the bitter taste of surrender. She knew what Raddock's men were capable of. She had seen the files on the Soup terrorists. If there was a military hit squad out there, it was kill or be killed. "I'm with you, John," Maeve said, her voice flat, hating herself for the concession. "If they're coming for us, we hit them first." Homelander smiled. Good, he turned to the other two. "Kevin, Reggie." The Deep shot out of his chair, standing at attention. 110%, Homelander. "Absolutely, nobody replaces us. We'll show those army jerks who's boss. I'm right behind you, man, right behind you." A train nodded frantically, wiping sweat from his brow. Yeah, boss, whatever you need. If they got super speed, I'll take 'em down, I'm in." Homelander looked back at Starlight. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She looked trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "Annie," Homelander prompted. Starlight closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I'm in," she whispered. "Perfect," Homelander beamed, clapping his hands together. "Family sticks together. We go in hard, we go in fast. We find the commanders, we find the lab, and we tear the red unit to pieces." He looked at the clock on the wall. "You have 30 minutes to get your gear and meet me on the roof. If you are 31 minutes late, I leave without you. And if I leave without you, do not be here when I get back." He turned and strode out of the boardroom, the doors swinging shut behind him. The remaining members of the Seven stood in the silence, the oppressive weight of Homelander's insanity pressing down on them. A-Train was the first to move, zipping out of the room in a blur of blue. The Deep scurried after him, muttering to himself. Starlight collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. She began to sob silently, her shoulders shaking. Maeve stood over her for a moment, an expression of profound pity and exhaustion on her face. She reached out, placing a hesitant hand on Starlight's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Annie," Maeve whispered quietly. "But in this world, you either do what he says or you die." Maeve turned and walked out of the room, leaving Starlight alone to face the terrifying reality of the war she had just been drafted into. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 80, Chapter 80, General Raddock 1, bonus chapter. The night air over the secluded Appalachian Valley was dead quiet. This was a heavily fortified outpost nested deep in a geographical bowl, 50 miles from the nearest civilian highway. Officially, it was an ordnance testing ground. Unofficially, it was the private fortress of General Raddock and the 4th Special Forces Group. High-voltage floodlights carved geometric shapes out of the darkness, illuminating the razor wire fences, the concrete guard towers, and the sprawling motor pool filled with Bradley fighting vehicles and Abrams tanks. In the southern watchtower, Specialist Miller, the real Specialist Miller, entirely unaware that his face had been worn by a clone to burn down a Vought facility, leaned against the reinforced glass. He brought a steaming thermos of cheap coffee to his lips, his eyes scanning the pitch-black tree line. F***G freezing tonight, Miller muttered, his breath fogging the glass. His partner, Corporal Jenkins, didn't look up from the thermal radar monitor. Winds picking up. Thermal is clean, just deer and coyotes out there. Miller took another sip of his coffee. The liquid never reached his throat. A high-velocity sniper round, fired from a Spencer Industries prototype rifle a mile away, punched through the reinforced glass of the watchtower as if it were wet tissue paper. The round took Miller precisely in the center of his forehead. His skull erupted in a spray of bone fragments and gray matter, painting the back wall of the tower in a macabre Jackson Pollock of gore. His headless body stood upright for a fraction of a second, before collapsing like a marionette with its strings cut. Jenkins had exactly half a second to process the spray of warm blood across his face, before the second round took him through the throat, severing his spinal cord and pinning his body to the radar console. Down in the valley, the 10-man Vought elite tactical team emerged from the tree line. They wore the cutting-edge gear Stan Edgar had procured from Arian Spencer. They were clad in radar-absorbent, carbon nanotube weave armor. Their faces were hidden behind multi-spectral visors that fed them real-time thermal, night vision, and electromagnetic data. They looked less like soldiers and more like androids from a dystopian future. The team leader, designated Alpha One, raised a closed fist. The 10 men fanned out, moving with a synchronized silent grace that spoke of decades of Black Ops experience. They approached the primary checkpoint. 4 heavily armed military sentries stood behind concrete barricades, their M4 rifles slung casually over their chests. Alpha One tapped a module on his forearm. 2 of the Vought operatives stepped forward, unholstering unwieldy-looking rifles with parabolic muzzles. These were the Spencer Industries sonic incapacitation arrays. The operatives aimed the weapons at the checkpoint and pulled the triggers. A sub-audible thrum rippled through the earth, a frequency that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly into the skeletal structure. At the checkpoint, the 4 soldiers dropped their weapons instantly. One man let out a shrieking wail, clapping his hands over his ears as thick blood began to pour from his ear canals. The sonic frequency was designed to rupture equilibrium and liquefy soft tissue. The fluid in their inner ears boiled. Their eyeballs hemorrhaged, turning the whites completely red. They fell to the concrete, convulsing violently, vomiting blood and stomach acid as their internal organs were subjected to an localized earthquake. Within 10 seconds, the convulsing stopped. Their brains had hemorrhaged under the acoustic pressure. The Vought team stepped over the bleeding bodies of the sentries, breaching the perimeter gate. The tactical team spread out into 3 distinct fire teams. Team Bravo moved toward the enlisted barracks. It was a single-story concrete building housing over 200 sleeping soldiers. They slapped flat, disc-shaped breaching charges onto the reinforced steel doors and the exterior walls. The simultaneous detonations blew the doors inward, sending shrapnel tearing through the first row of bunks. The explosion jolted the soldiers awake in a nightmare of fire and smoke. Men screamed, scrambling from their bunks in their underwear, desperately reaching for their locked weapon racks. Team Bravo stepped through the smoke, their Spencer Arms assault rifles raised. The rifles fired armor-piercing ammunition at a cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. The Vought operatives walked down the center aisle of the barracks, their muzzles flashing in the darkness. The high-caliber rounds tore through the thin mattresses, through the metal bed frames, and through the soft flesh of the soldiers. Men were cut to pieces before they could even stand up. Blood sprayed across the institutional white walls in wet arcs. A young private, no older than 19, managed to rack the slide of a pistol. He popped up from behind a footlocker, aiming wildly at the black armored figures. A Vought operative tracked his rifle and fired a 3-round burst. The bullets impacted the private's chest, tearing through his sternum and out his back, throwing his lifeless body against the wall. The operatives tossed incendiary grenades, thermite-based explosives, into the corners of the barracks as they moved. The chemicals ignited with blinding white intensity, burning at 4,000 degrees. Mattresses caught fire. Flesh caught fire. The screams of the wounded were drowned out by the roaring inferno and the relentless chatter of the assault rifles. Outside, Team Charlie was neutralizing the motor pool. Military mechanics and night watch personnel were scrambling toward the armored vehicles, desperately trying to mount a defense. The Vought operatives deployed shoulder-fired micro-missiles. The projectiles snaked through the air, locking onto the thermal heat of the Bradley fighting vehicle's engines. The armored personnel carriers erupted into fireballs, their ammunition stores cooking off in spectacular secondary explosions. Shrapnel the size of dinner plates rained down on the frantic soldiers, severing limbs and crushing skulls. A mechanic screamed as a piece of burning tank tread pinned him to the asphalt, his legs severed at the thighs. A Vought operative walked past him, aimed a tactical shotgun equipped with explosive slug rounds at the man's head, and pulled the trigger, erasing his misery and his face in a single blast. The base was descending into apocalyptic chaos. Sirens blared, their wails cutting through the night. The smell of burning diesel, roasted meat, and the coppery tang of thousands of gallons of spilled blood choked the cold mountain air. The 10 Vought operatives moved like angels of death, their advanced armor shrugging off the uncoordinated small arms fire from the surviving soldiers. They were a perfectly oiled machine of murder, executing Stan Edgar's order to burn the military's secret army to the bedrock. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 81, Chapter 81, General Raddock 2. Deep beneath the surface, inside the heavily reinforced command bunker, General Raddock was a man watching his world end. The command center was a flurry of panic shouting and flashing red warning lights. The massive tactical screens on the front wall were dying one by one as the cameras above were systematically destroyed or melted. Raddock, a man with a chest full of medals and a face carved from old leather, gripped the edge of the holodable, his knuckles white. Report, Raddock bellowed, his voice booming over the klaxons. What the F***K is hitting us? A communications officer, his headset askew, looked up with terrified eyes. Sir, we've lost contact with the southern perimeter. Thermal imaging shows multiple high-intensity fires. We're taking massive casualties. Is it an airstrike? Artillery? Raddock demanded, leaning over the table. No, sir, a radar technician shouted. It's ground forces. Small arms, but they're cutting through our armor like butter. They've got some kind of sonic weaponry. First platoon they just liquefied, General. Raddock's face went pale. Sonic weaponry. Who are they? Raddock yelled, his spit flying onto the tactical map. The Russians? The Chinese? Who the F***K attacks a United States military base on sovereign soil? Sir, they're wearing black tactical gear, no insignia. The comms officer yelled back. Raddock's mind raced. He had spent his life preparing for a conventional war. He had built this black site to house the 4th Group, to secretly train men who could fight the freaks Vought paraded around. And now, out of nowhere, an impossibly advanced strike force was dismantling his life's work in minutes. It's a coup, Raddock muttered, his paranoia flaring. It's the goddamn CIA, or it's Vought. He slammed his fist on the table. I don't care who they are, Raddock roared, drawing his sidearm. This is an act of war. Send the Abrams tanks. Send everyone. I want those bastards ground into the dirt. Tell the armory to issue the heavy munitions. Do not let them reach this bunker. General, the radar tech screamed, his voice cracking an octave higher. Sir, we have a new contact. Another ground team, Raddock asked, spinning around. No, sir. Altitude 30,000 feet. Descending at Mach 3. It's... Boom. The sonic boom hit the valley like a physical hammer. Above ground, the surviving soldiers covering the entrance to the command bunker looked up into the smoke-filled sky. The clouds tore open. A figure dropped from the heavens, landing in the exact center of the courtyard with the force of a meteor impact. A crater 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide instantly formed, tossing heavily armed soldiers into the air like broken toys. Dust and pulverized asphalt plumed upward. As the dust settled, the silhouette became clear. The blue suit, the red boots, the American flag cape billowing majestically in the wind generated by the fires. Homelander. He slowly stood up from the crouch. He looked around the burning base, taking in the carnage wrought by the Vought tactical team. He sneered, disgusted by the human inefficiency. My turn, Homelander whispered. His eyes flared blindingly red. 2 concentrated beams of heat vision, burning hotter than the surface of the sun, erupted from his eyes. He turned his head in a 360-degree sweeping arc. The lasers sliced through the night. They hit an incoming Abrams tank. The beams carved cleanly through the depleted uranium armor of the chassis as if it were made of butter. The tank kept rolling for a second, then the top half of the turret simply slid off, crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. The ammunition inside cooked off, incinerating the crew in a localized inferno. The beams swept across a platoon of 30 soldiers rushing to reinforce the courtyard. The heat vision hit them waist-high. Men were bisected instantly. Torsos tumbled to the asphalt, while their legs remained standing for an impossible second before collapsing. The smell of instantly cauterized flesh and boiling blood overwhelmed the scent of cordite. Homelander stopped the beams. He smiled, his teeth bright against the smoke. "Where are they?" he yelled, his voice echoing over the screams. "Where are the replacements?" Suddenly, a massive gust of wind knocked a dozen soldiers off their feet. A blur of blue and white lightning tore through the courtyard. "A train." The speedster was moving at speeds exceeding Mach 1.5. A soldier raised his rifle. A train ran through the man. The kinetic impact of a human body colliding with another at that velocity was catastrophic. The soldier exploded. He turned into a red mist, a shower of bone splinters and liquefied organs raining down on his horrified comrades. A-Train laughed, a manic sound fueled by a fresh injection of Compound V. He became a deadly pinball, ricocheting around the courtyard. He ran through a group of 5 men, turning them into a spray of viscera. He grabbed a soldier by the arm, accelerating to super speed while remaining stationary, the sheer torque ripping the man's arm out of its socket with a tearing sound. "Too slow, you're all too F***G slow." A train screamed, his goggles coated in a thick layer of blood. From the roof of a nearby supply building, Queen Maeve dropped into the fray. She landed on the hood of an armored Humvee, crushing the engine block under her boots. A heavy machine gunner, mounted on the turret, swung his .50 caliber weapon toward her and pulled the trigger. Maeve raised her bracers. The armor-piercing bullets struck the metal, sparking and deflecting harmlessly into the night. She looked at the gunner, her face an unreadable mask of cynical exhaustion. She leaped. She crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, landing on the turret. She drove her fist straight through the bulletproof glass of the gunner's shield, shattering it. Her hand closed around the man's throat. She squeezed. His neck snapped with a sound like a dry branch breaking. She casually tossed his limp body from the vehicle. Soldiers swarmed her, firing their assault rifles. The bullets bruised her skin, but they couldn't stop her. She moved with Spartan efficiency. A backhand shattered a man's ribcage, driving bone fragments into his lungs. A front kick folded a soldier in half, his spine breaking audibly. She fought mechanically, an indestructible warrior wading through a sea of fragile mortality. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 82, Chapter 82, General Raddock 3, bonus chapter. On the far side of the courtyard, the deep was trying to keep up. There was no water here and no marine life to command. He was out of his element, and he knew Homelander was watching. A squad of soldiers took cover behind a concrete barricade, laying down suppressing fire. "Take that, you army jerks," the Deep yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He ran forward, his superhuman strength his only asset. He grabbed a heavy steel door that had been blown off a nearby bunker. Using it as a makeshift shield, he charged the barricade. The bullets pinged off the metal. He reached the barricade and swung the steel door like a massive baseball bat. The impact caught 3 soldiers simultaneously. The sheer blunt force trauma crushed their bodies against the concrete, pulverizing their internal organs. The Deep let out an adrenaline-fueled laugh, looking around wildly to see if Homelander had noticed his kill. Above it all, hovering reluctantly in the air, was Starlight. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with pure horror. She was wearing the revealing swimsuit costume, floating above a literal slaughterhouse. "No," she whispered, watching a train turn a man into a red stain. "Oh my God, no." A spotlight from a surviving guard tower swept over her. Soup in the air, fire, a sergeant screamed from below. A dozen rifles turned their muzzles upward. Tracers lit up the night sky, zipping toward her. Starlight gasped, raising her arms to shield her face. The bullets struck her. They didn't penetrate her durable skin, but the kinetic impacts hurt, stinging like a swarm of angry wasps, leaving dark bruises blooming across her exposed arms and thighs. She panicked. Survival instinct overrode her moral revulsion. She looked at the massive high-voltage floodlights illuminating the courtyard. Her eyes began to glow with a golden light. She siphoned the electricity from the entire grid. The lights across the base flickered, dimmed, and died, plunging the slaughter into darkness, illuminated only by the burning vehicles. All that electrical energy concentrated in her hands. "I'm sorry," she screamed down into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." She thrust her hands downward. Twin beams of concussive photon energy erupted from her palms. She hadn't meant to kill them. She just wanted to knock them away, to make them stop shooting. But she absorbed too much power, and she had no control over the chaotic environment. Her blasts hit the squad of soldiers firing at her. The concussive force was like a bomb going off. The blast wave shattered their ribs, ruptured their eardrums, and lifted them off their feet, throwing them backward into the brick wall of the armory with bone-crushing velocity. They hit the wall and crumpled to the ground, a tangled mass of broken limbs. They didn't get back up. Starlight covered her mouth with her glowing hands, a sob tearing from her throat. She had just killed them. She was a murderer. She was one of them now. Homelander floated through the center of the carnage, completely untouched by the violence swirling around him. He walked on air, a few feet above the bloody concrete, looking down at the dying men with absolute contempt. "Mud crawlers," Homelander sneered, kicking a severed arm out of his path. "You really thought you could build a better me? Out of this." He arrived at the entrance to the command bunker. The heavy blast doors were sealed shut. Homelander landed on the concrete, grabbed the seam of the massive steel doors with his bare hands, and peeled them open like a tin can. He stepped into the bunker. The remaining command staff froze, staring at the god of death who had just breached their impenetrable fortress. General Raddock stood at the head of the holodable. His pistol was drawn, aiming directly at Homelander's chest. His hand was shaking violently. Raddock breathed, his face drained of all color. "What have you done? You've attacked the United States military. This is treason." Homelander smiled. It was a gentle expression. He walked slowly toward the general, ignoring the terrified staff cowering against the walls. "Treason?" Homelander asked, his voice echoing in the concrete bunker. "General Raddock, I'm an American hero. I wear the flag." He stopped just inches from the barrel of Raddock's pistol. "You, on the other hand," Homelander continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "are a traitor. You stole from Vought. You thought you could take some grunts, pump them full of our juice, and replace me." Raddock's eyes darted left and right in confusion. "Replace you? What the hell are you talking about? I don't have any sups. I lobby against you freaks." Homelander's smile vanished. He tilted his head. "Liar." "I swear to God," Raddock yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It doesn't matter," Homelander whispered. "You thought it. You wanted to, and that's enough." Raddock fired. The bullet struck Homelander squarely in the chest. The slug flattened and dropped to the floor. Homelander reached out and grabbed the barrel of the pistol. With a casual twist of his wrist, he melted the steel into a useless lump of slag, crushing Raddock's fingers in the process. Raddock screamed, dropping to his knees, clutching his mangled hand. Homelander looked down at the general. The ultimate military authority, reduced to a pathetic mess at his boots. It was intoxicating. It was exactly what the letter had told him he deserved. "You wanted to build a god," Homelander said, his eyes beginning to glow with a searing heat. "Let me show you what a real god looks like." Homelander focused his heat vision, narrowing the beams until they were agonizingly hot lasers. He aimed at Raddock's knees. The lasers sliced through the bone and cartilage. Raddock's shrieks echoed off the bunker walls, a sound of unimaginable agony as his legs were severed at the joints. He collapsed forward, thrashing in a pool of his own boiling blood. The command staff screamed, covering their eyes, begging for mercy. Homelander ignored them. He kept his glowing eyes fixed on the general. He slowly moved the beams up Raddock's torso, cauterizing the wounds as he went, prolonging the death, ensuring the man felt every excruciating second of his punishment. "You are nothing," Homelander whispered over the screams. "You are all just mud." The red beams finally reached Raddock's head. With a sudden surge of intensity, Homelander flared his vision to maximum output. The general's skull glowed white-hot from the inside out before popping like an overripe melon, showering the Holodable in ash and charred bone. Homelander stood over the smoking remains, his chest heaving, his eyes fading back to a serene blue. He looked at the remaining officers cowering in the room. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 83, Chapter 83, Red Unit bonus chapter. Homelander stepped out of the ruined blast doors and ascended the concrete ramp back into the night air. The Appalachian Valley was bathed in the orange and yellow hues of 100 localized infernos. The smell of burning, scorched earth and incinerated flesh hung thick in the cold wind. He floated a few inches off the ground, his arms crossed over his chest. He surveyed the destruction his team had wrought. Queen Maeve stood near the burning husk of a Bradley fighting vehicle, wiping a streak of blood from her cheek. A-Train was a vibrating blur near the perimeter, pacing back and forth amidst the scattered remains of a platoon. The Deep was cowering behind a stack of concrete barriers, hands over his ears, trembling. Starlight was on her knees near the armory, her glowing hands dimming as she stared at the broken bodies she had thrown against the brick wall. "Is that it?" Homelander called out, his voice echoing across the courtyard, loud enough to be heard over the crackling flames. "Is this the grand military replacement? A bunch of human meat sacks in camouflage." "They didn't have sups, John," Maeve yelled back, her voice tight with exhaustion and disgust. "They were just soldiers. We just slaughtered a base full of normal people." "They were traitors," Maggie, Homelander corrected, his tone adopting that paternal edge he used for PR statements. "They were stealing our property. They were trying to." Pop, 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 pop. The sound was the vacuum-sealed snap of air being displaced. Homelander stopped speaking. He slowly turned his head toward the center of the courtyard. The flames from a burning watchtower illuminated the asphalt. There, standing in a V-shaped tactical formation, were 5 figures. They wore matte black tactical armor. It absorbed the light of the fires, making them look like voids torn out of the night. On the chest plate of each suit, painted in a glossy crimson, was a single word: red. The courtyard went entirely still. "Well," Homelander smiled, a terrifying stretching of his lips. He lowered himself until his red boots touched the asphalt. "Speak of the devil and he shall appear." "They look like F***G robots," A-Train sneered, stopping his pacing to stand 20 yards to the right of the armored squad. "Look at that armor. They gotta weigh half a ton. They're too slow." Red 5, the figure at the far left of the formation, turned his helmet toward A-Train. "You want to test that, track star?" A deep voice projected from Red 1, the giant standing at the apex of the formation. With pleasure, A-Train laughed. He dropped into a runner's stance. Blue lightning crackled around his boots. Boom! A-Train broke the sound barrier from a standstill. He was a streak of kinetic energy aimed directly at Red 1's chest, intending to punch straight through the ceramic plating at Mach 1.5. Red 5 vanished. A-Train, moving at blinding speed, suddenly shrieked. His forward momentum abruptly halted as something impossibly dense and infinitely small struck the underside of his chin like an anti-aircraft round. A-Train was launched vertically into the air, his jaw shattered, blood trailing from his mouth in a crimson mist. Red 5 instantly reappeared at his 6-foot armored height, exactly where A-Train had just been standing. He didn't even look up as the speedster crashed into the roof of the barracks 50 feet away, groaning in agony. "Who's slow?" Red 1 asked. Homelander's smile widened. He didn't care about A-Train. He was watching the sheer efficiency of the strike, size alteration, and retaining mass. Clever, very clever. "Don't underestimate them," John Maeve shouted, drawing her sword from her back scabbard. "I never underestimate anyone," Maggie, Homelander said softly. He gestured toward the red unit with an open hand. Show me what you've got. Entertain me. Red 1 moved with the terrifying momentum of a freight train. He closed the distance to Maeve in 3 massive strides. Maeve swung her sword in a horizontal arc, aiming for the gap between the helmet and the chest plate. Red 1 raised his armored forearm. The unbreakable steel of Maeve's sword struck the carbon nanotube plating. The impact rang out like a massive church bell. The sword bounced off, sending a jarring shockwave up Maeve's arm. Before Maeve could recover her guard, Red 1 delivered a front kick to her abdomen. The Tier 1 strength behind the blow folded her in half. She flew backward, skipping across the asphalt like a skipped stone until she smashed through a concrete barricade, burying herself in rubble. Hey, the Deep yelled from his hiding spot, trying to sound brave. You leave her alone. Red 4 turned his faceless black helmet toward the aquatic soup. Sleep, Red 4 commanded, his synthesized voice echoing across the courtyard. The Deep's eyes rolled to the back of his head. He let out a snoring sigh and collapsed onto the ground, instantly comatose amidst the roaring fires. Starlight, her face streaked with soot and tears, raised her hands. Her eyes flared blindingly bright as she drew ambient energy from the surrounding flames. Stop it, she screamed. She unleashed a concentrated beam of photon energy directly at Red 4. Pop! Red 2 materialized directly in front of the beam. He reached out and grabbed Red 4's shoulder. Pop! Both armored figures vanished a microsecond before the blast of light incinerated the space they had just occupied. Where did they? Starlight gasped, spinning around. Pop! Red 2 appeared directly behind her. He swept his armored leg, taking Starlight's feet out from under her. As she fell, Red 2 grabbed her by the collar of her bodysuit. Pop! He teleported her 50 feet into the air and let go. Starlight screamed as she plummeted, crashing hard onto the hood of a destroyed Humvee, the metal buckling under her durable frame. She lay there, groaning, the breath knocked entirely out of her lungs. Homelander stood completely still. His team, the 7, the greatest heroes on Earth, had been dismantled in exactly 45 seconds. Beautiful, Homelander breathed. He began to float slowly upward, ascending 10 feet into the air. Finally, something that isn't made of wet tissue paper. Red 3 stepped forward. He raised both of his armored hands toward the floating god. Red 3 unleashed the void. A beam of absolute zero energy, a visible distortion of localized winter, erupted from his gauntlets. It struck Homelander squarely in the chest. Instantly, a massive block of opaque ice encased Homelander, freezing him mid-air. The block fell to the ground with a tremendous crash, a 2-ton glacier sitting in the middle of a burning military base. The red unit stood in formation, watching the ice. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 84, Chapter 84, Soldier Boy 1 bonus chapter. Target neutralized, Red 2 asked over the external speakers. Negative, Red 1 replied, stand ready. Inside the block of ice, a red light began to glow. It started as a faint ember, then grew into a miniature sun. The ice hissed, steamed, and then violently exploded outward in a cloud of superheated vapor. Homelander stepped out of the steam. His suit was perfectly dry. His eyes were burning with unrestrained heat vision. Cold, Homelander chuckled, rolling his neck. I like cold, but I prefer. He unleashed his lasers. Twin beams of crimson destruction tore toward Red 3. Red 3 raised his hands, conjuring a wall of ice 10 feet thick in a fraction of a second. The heat vision slammed into the ice. The sheer thermal kinetic output of Homelander's eyes met the absolute zero resistance of Red 3's Tier 1 cryokinesis. The clash created a localized pressure wave that blew the surrounding fires out completely. Steam shrieked into the sky, creating a blinding fog over the courtyard. You can't hide behind a wall forever. Homelander yelled, increasing the intensity of his beams, slowly melting through the barricade. Suddenly, a high-pitched sound tore through the sky from above. It sounded like something incredibly heavy falling from a very, very great height. Homelander cut off his heat vision, looking upward. The red glow in his eyes faded into confusion. The red unit also looked up, taking a synchronized step backward. Crash! The impact struck the exact center of the courtyard, right between Homelander and the red unit. The asphalt liquefied. A crater 20 feet deep and 50 feet wide was instantly excavated from the earth. A shockwave of dirt, concrete, and pulverized rock blasted outward, forcing Homelander to shield his face with his cape. The dust plumed high into the air, swirling in the thick steam. Silence descended on the base once more. Homelander lowered his cape. He narrowed his eyes, trying to peer through the settling dust. "Another one?" Homelander asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "Did you boys drop a bomb, or did you call a friend?" "We didn't call anyone," Red One's mechanical voice replied from the opposite side of the crater. Heavy footsteps echoed from the center of the dust cloud, the sound of metal clinking against metal. A figure slowly walked up the steep incline of the crater. The dust parted. He was wearing dark green tactical pants, heavy combat boots, and a military issue vest. A solid brass shield rested effortlessly on his left forearm, a stylized eagle embossed on its surface. His hair was slightly overgrown, his jaw covered in a thick layer of scruff. He stopped at the lip of the crater. He looked at the red unit to his left and then turned his head to look at Homelander to his right. Homelander's jaw literally dropped. The arrogant smirk completely evaporated into an expression of pure shock. Soldier Boy rolled his neck, cracking it loudly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver Zippo lighter, and casually lit the half-smoked cigar clamped between his teeth. He took a long drag and exhaled a thick cloud of smoke. Homelander floated down until his boots touched the ground. He took a hesitant step forward. "Father," Homelander said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Soldier Boy took the cigar out of his mouth. He looked Homelander up and down, taking in the pristine blue suit, the golden eagles on his shoulders, the immaculate blonde hair. He spat on the ground. "You wear a cape," Soldier Boy sneered. "What are you, a fairy? You look like a cheap F***G knockoff." Homelander's face twitched. The vulnerability vanished into a blinding rage. "I am the upgrade," Homelander roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Let's see," Soldier Boy said. Homelander launched himself forward, breaking the sound barrier over a distance of 30 feet. He threw a right cross aimed directly at Soldier Boy's jaw, a punch that had decapitated Sups in the past. Soldier Boy raised his left arm. Clang! Homelander's fist struck the solid brass shield. The sound was deafening, a catastrophic ringing that shattered the remaining windows in the base. Homelander's momentum was stopped dead. The shockwave of the impact blew the dust away completely. Homelander stared at his fist, pressed against the unyielding metal of the shield. He looked up into Soldier Boy's eyes. There was no strain on his face. "My turn," Soldier Boy grunted. He stepped into the guard, bringing his right fist up in a looping uppercut. The punch caught Homelander flush under the chin. Homelander was lifted entirely off his feet, launched backward through the air. He crashed into the side of a concrete guard tower, his body embedding itself deep into the reinforced stone. "What the hell is that?" Red 2 asked over the secure comms, watching the legendary hero casually swat away the strongest being on the planet. "Target is designated," Soldier Boy Red 1 replied, his tone remaining clinical. "Threat level, maximum, engage." Red 1 charged the lip of the crater. He moved with his Tier 1 strength, throwing a massive haymaker at the back of Soldier Boy's head. Soldier Boy pivoted on his heel, swinging the heavy brass shield in a horizontal backhand. The edge of the shield collided with Red 1's armored helmet. Sparks flew. The carbon nanotube plating, designed to stop tank shells, groaned under the kinetic force of the impact. Red 1 was knocked off his feet, spinning in the air before crashing heavily onto the asphalt. "Nice suit," Soldier Boy mocked, turning to face the red unit. "But armor is for pusses who don't want to bleed." Red 3 stepped forward, unleashing a torrent of absolute zero ice from both hands, attempting to encase Soldier Boy entirely. The freezing mist washed over the green tactical suit. Frost accumulated rapidly, turning Soldier Boy white. Soldier Boy just sighed, a cloud of frozen breath escaping his lips. He flexed his arms. Cracked. The ice shattered outward in a million pieces. His Tier 1 super defense completely negated the thermal shock. "Is that the best you got, Snowflake?" Soldier Boy sneered. He closed the distance to Red 3 in 2 massive bounds. He grabbed the armored operative by the throat with his right hand, lifting him single-handedly off the ground. Pop! Red 2 teleported directly above Soldier Boy, dropping down with both armored boots aimed at his shoulders, intent on driving him into the pavement. Soldier Boy released Red 3, dropping him to the ground, and raised his shield above his head. Red 2's boots slammed into the brass. The shield didn't budge an inch. Soldier Boy shoved upward, throwing the teleporting operative 10 feet into the air. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 85, Chapter 85. Soldier Boy 2, My Head, Homelander shrieked. Homelander erupted from the rubble of the guard tower. Blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away, staring at the crimson smear on his white glove with absolute horror. "You made me bleed," Homelander whispered. His eyes flared into an inferno. "I am the only god." Homelander unleashed a continuous torrent of heat vision. He unleashed maximum output, a sustained beam of nuclear heat aimed directly at Soldier Boy's chest. Soldier Boy braced his legs, digging his boots into the asphalt, and raised the shield. The red beams struck the brass. The metal began to glow cherry red, then white hot. The heat radiating from the clash was so intense it ignited the fuel leaking from the destroyed vehicles 50 yards away. "Come on, you whining little bee **H. Soldier Boy roared over the deafening hiss of the lasers. "Push." Homelander screamed, pushing harder, flying forward to close the distance, pouring every ounce of his power into the beams. Soldier Boy held his ground. He gritted his teeth, his muscles bulging under the tactical suit. The shield was absorbing the heat, but the kinetic force of the beams was pushing him backward. His boots carved twin trenches into the asphalt as he was slowly forced to slide back. "He's too strong," Maeve gasped, limping out of the rubble, clutching her ribs. She looked at Starlight, who was staggering to her feet. "Annie, we have to help John." "Help him," Starlight coughed, looking at the 2 battling titans. "They're trying to kill each other." "If Soldier Boy wins, he kills us next." Maeve yelled, "Move." Red Unit, Red 1 commanded, getting back to his feet, his helmet dented from the shield strike. Coordinated strike. Suddenly, the battlefield shifted. The 7 and the Red Unit, mortal enemies just minutes ago, turned their collective attention to the man standing behind the glowing brass shield. "Kill him," Homelander shrieked, his eyes still locked in the laser clash. "All of you, kill him." Maeve vaulted over a burning Humvee, launching herself through the air. She brought both fists down in a double hammer strike aimed at the back of Soldier Boy's neck. Soldier Boy sensed her coming. He shifted his weight, angling the shield to deflect Homelander's lasers upward into the sky, and spun around. He caught Maeve's double hammer strike with his bare right forearm. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, but his arm didn't buckle. He grabbed Maeve by the breastplate of her armor and hurled her directly into the path of Red 1, who was charging from the flank. The 2 armored figures collided in a tangle of limbs, crashing to the ground. "Sleep," Red 4 commanded, stepping out of the shadows, focusing the entirety of his Tier 3 telepathy into a psychic spike aimed at Soldier Boy's brain. Soldier Boy paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing as he felt the pressure against his consciousness. His Tier 1 super defense wasn't just physical, it extended to his neurological structure. The psychic command hit his mind like a pebble hitting a bank vault. "Get out of my head, freak," Soldier Boy growled. He picked up a chunk of concrete debris the size of a microwave and hurled it like a baseball. It struck Red 4 squarely in the chest, the kinetic force lifting the armored operative off his feet and throwing him backward into the darkness. Starlight, her hands glowing with blinding light, stepped into his line of sight. She unleashed a massive concussive blast, a wall of pure photon energy. Soldier Boy raised the shield, leaning into the blast. The light washed over him, blinding the entire courtyard, but the kinetic force merely pushed him back half a step. "Pop!" Red 2 appeared directly behind him, wrapping his armored arms around Soldier Boy's waist in a bear hug, attempting to teleport them both into the earth. "Get off me," Soldier Boy roared. He threw his head backward, delivering a devastating headbutt to the faceplate of Red 2's helmet. The reinforced visor cracked under the impact. Red 2's grip loosened. Soldier Boy grabbed the armored arms, twisted his hips, and suplexed the 600-pound operative over his shoulder, slamming him into the asphalt with a crater-forming impact. "Die!" Homelander screamed, diving from the sky, leading with a flying knee aimed at Soldier Boy's face. Soldier Boy brought the shield up in a desperate block. Homelander's knee crashed into the brass. The force of the blow drove Soldier Boy to one knee, the asphalt cracking beneath him. Immediately, Red 3 unleashed another torrent of absolute zero ice, freezing Soldier Boy's legs to the ground, rooting him in place. Maeve, recovering from the collision, sprinted forward and delivered a brutal roundhouse kick to Soldier Boy's exposed ribs. Homelander landed, grabbing the edge of the brass shield with both hands, trying to rip it away. "Give me that." Soldier Boy looked surrounded. He was on one knee, his legs encased in solid ice, a super-powered woman kicking his ribs and a flying god trying to disarm him, while a team of armored soldiers recovered to strike again. Soldier Boy laughed. It was a rumbling sound that vibrated with pure joy. He was in his element. He was in the S***T. He focused his Tier 1 strength. With a roar that shook the very air, he yanked the shield backward, pulling Homelander off balance. In the same fluid motion, he drove his forehead directly into Homelander's nose. Crunch! Homelander staggered backward, clutching his face, blood pouring freely over his lips. Soldier Boy flexed his legs. The ice encasing them exploded into 1,000 glittering shards, unable to hold the raw physical power of his muscles. He stood up, towering over the battlefield. He backhanded Maeve with the flat of his shield, sending her spinning away. He looked around at the bleeding and terrified faces of the 7 and the dented forms of the Red unit. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. Power Stone Progress Update 15-100, 86, Chapter 86, Soldier Boy 3, Bonus Chapter. The courtyard of the fortified Appalachian base was a vision of hell. The burning husks of armored vehicles cast flickering shadows across the cracked and cratered asphalt. Standing in the epicenter of the devastation, surrounded by the greatest array of superhuman power assembled in a single location, was Soldier Boy. He looked like a wolf who had just found his way into a very crowded and very soft sheep pen. He spun the eagle-embossed brass shield on his left forearm, the metal catching the orange glow of the surrounding fires. Homelander stood 20 feet away, his chest heaving, his pristine American flag cape singed at the edges. A thin trail of crimson blood leaked from his left nostril, tracking down over his lips that were pulled back in a rictus of pure fury. "You're just a relic," Homelander hissed, his voice vibrating with a hysterical edge. "A forgotten piece of trash that should have stayed buried in the ice. And you are a whiny little B****, H wearing a flag as a bib," Soldier Boy replied, his voice a low rumble that carried effortlessly over the crackling fires. He spat a glob of blood and saliva onto the ruined asphalt. "You've spent your whole life fighting paper targets. Let me show you what it feels like to fight a man." "Kill him," Homelander shrieked, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at the man who was, biologically, his father. "Tear him to pieces." The command shattered the momentary stillness. The battlefield erupted into absolute chaos. Queen Maeve was the first to move. Despite the bruising on her ribs from the previous impact, her warrior instincts overrode her pain. She lunged forward, her boots pounding against the concrete, moving faster than an express train. She leapt into the air, bringing her silver sword down in a two-handed vertical cleave aimed directly at Soldier Boy's skull. Soldier Boy raised his left arm. Clang! The unbreakable blade of Maeve's sword struck the brass shield with the force of a falling meteor. The shockwave of the impact blew a ring of dust outward, rippling through the smoke. Soldier Boy's Tier 1 super defense and Tier 1 super strength absorbed the kinetic energy perfectly. With a gruff exhale, Soldier Boy twisted his hips and thrust his shield forward. parrying the blade and striking Maeve squarely in the chest. The impact lifted her off her feet, sending her flying backward into the side of an overturned transport truck. The metal of the truck bed caved inward around her body with a deafening screech. From the shadows of the burning armory, the Deep watched the exchange with terrified eyes. He was shivering, his green and gold scale patterned suit covered in dust. He had no super strength that could rival these titans, no energy blasts, no tactical armor. He was a man who talked to fish, stranded in a burning desert of concrete. But Homelander's order echoed in his mind. If he didn't fight, Homelander would laser him in half the moment this was over. "Okay, Deep. You're a member of the Seven," he muttered to himself, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Just hit him from behind." He looked around frantically and spotted a jagged piece of steel shrapnel, a torn section of an Abrams tank tread lying near his feet. Grunting with the effort, the Deep hoisted the sharp metal over his shoulder. He waited until Soldier Boy was turning his attention toward the advancing red unit. With a high-pitched battle cry that sounded more like a yelp, the Deep sprinted out from his cover, raising the jagged steel tread high above his head, aiming for the back of Soldier Boy's unhelmeted head. "Die, you old fossil," the Deep screamed. With the casual motion of a man swatting a mosquito, Soldier Boy swung his right arm backward. His heavy combat boot pivoted on the asphalt, his massive shoulders transferring torque through his core. His backhand caught the Deep perfectly in the center of his chest, before the heavy steel tread could even begin its downward arc. The sound was sickening. It was the crunching collapse of an entire ribcage. The Deep was launched backward, the steel tread flying from his hands. He hit the ground and skidded across the rough concrete, his body tumbling like a rag doll until he crashed into the base of a concrete barrier. Soldier Boy turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the wheezing form of the aquatic hero. The Deep was lying on his back, staring up at the smoke-filled sky. Frothy blood was bubbling up over his lips. His chest cavity was visibly caved in, his lungs punctured by a dozen splintered ribs. Soldier Boy walked over to him, his heavy boots echoing like a death knell. He stood over the Deep, looking down with an expression of pure disgust. "What the F***K are you even supposed to be?" Soldier Boy asked, nudging the Deep's scaled boot with the toe of his own. "You look like a walking sushi roll." "Please," the Deep gurgled, blood spilling down his chin. He reached up a trembling hand, grasping weakly at the fabric of Soldier Boy's tactical pants. I'm a hero." "You're a disgrace to the uniform," Soldier Boy growled. He looked at the exposed gills, fluttering desperately on either side of the Deep's torso. Soldier Boy crouched down. He reached out with his bare right hand and grabbed a fistful of the fleshy slits. The Deep let out a horrifying shriek of absolute agony. "Breathe this in, Fish Boy," Soldier Boy whispered. He squeezed his fist, his Tier 1 strength easily crushing the delicate respiratory organs into a bloody paste, before casually standing up and bringing his heavy combat boot down squarely on the Deep's face. Crunch! The skull gave way instantly. The screaming stopped. The Lord of the Seven Seas was nothing more than a stain on the Appalachian asphalt. "One down," Soldier Boy grunted, shifting his stance. "Deep," A-Train screamed from across the courtyard. The speedster was vibrating so fast he looked like a blue blur. The drugs in his system, combined with the pure terror of watching his teammate get squashed like an insect, pushed his heart right into the red zone. "You're dead, you hear me. You're F***G dead," A-Train roared. He engaged his super speed, turning the world into a frozen diorama. He zipped in a wide circle around the perimeter of the base, building up kinetic energy, increasing his velocity to well over Mach 1.5. To Soldier Boy's eyes, A-Train vanished, replaced by a continuous rush of wind and a streak of blue lightning that circled him like a shark in the water. Wham! A-Train darted in, delivering a high-speed punch to Soldier Boy's kidney before instantly retreating back into his circular running pattern. The blow carried the force of a runaway semi-truck. Soldier Boy grunted, taking half a step to the side, but his Tier 1 super defense held firm. The impact merely bruised the muscle tissue, a bruise that his Tier 1 regeneration was already healing. Wham! Another strike, this time to the back of the neck. Soldier Boy staggered slightly, his eyes tracking the blur. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. Power Stone Progress Update, 15100. 87, Chapter 87, Soldier Boy 4, Bonus Chapter. "You're fast, kid," Soldier Boy called out, his voice calm, turning his body in a slow circle to track the sonic booms. "I'll give you that, but you're sloppy." A-Train didn't listen. The adrenaline was screaming in his ears. He banked hard off the side of a concrete building, launching himself directly at Soldier Boy's face, intending to drive his fist straight through the old man's skull. A-Train closed the distance in a millisecond. Soldier Boy raised his left arm, holding the heavy brass shield out at neck height, rigid as a steel girder, stepping perfectly into the path of the speeding hero. A-Train, moving at over 1,000 miles an hour, ran throat first directly into the unyielding edge of the solid brass shield. The sound was a catastrophic crack that echoed louder than a gunshot. A-Train's forward momentum was arrested so violently that his body flipped completely backward in midair. The vertebrae in his neck shattered instantly. His trachea was crushed flat. He hit the ground in a tangle of broken limbs, sliding across the concrete, leaving a long smear of blood behind him. He rolled to a stop at the base of a burning jeep, his body twisted at horrific angles. Soldier Boy walked over to the broken speedster at a leisurely pace. A-Train was still alive, paralyzed from the neck down, his eyes wide and rolling in panic as he choked on his own blood, unable to draw a breath through his collapsed throat. "The problem with running away from your problems," Soldier Boy said, standing over him, "is that eventually you run right into a wall." Soldier Boy raised the edge of his shield high into the air, the brass gleaming with the reflection of the flames, and brought it down like a guillotine. The edge severed A-Train's neck completely. The fastest man alive lay perfectly still in the dirt. "That's two," Soldier Boy announced, turning his attention back to the center of the courtyard. While the 7 engaged in their chaotic strikes, the 5 armored Red unit had reorganized their formation. Red 5, standing at the rear of the formation, vanished. Size alteration, Tier 3. He shrank down to the size of a grain of rice. To him, the battlefield became an impossibly vast landscape of towering fires and mountainous debris. He sprinted across the concrete, his tiny legs pumping at blurring speeds. His objective was simple: infiltrate Soldier Boy's physical defenses. If the skin couldn't be broken from the outside, he would enter through an orifice, the ear canal or the nasal passage, and expand his armored mass directly inside the brain cavity. Red 5 scaled the side of Soldier Boy's combat boot, racing up the fabric of his tactical pants, navigating the heavy web gear, moving toward the exposed skin of the neck. Soldier Boy paused. His Tier 1 enhanced senses picked up the microscopic vibration of tiny boots on his tactical vest. It felt like an aggressive armored flea. He waited until he felt the tiny vibration reach the collar of his shirt, making a leap toward his ear. With lightning-fast reflexes, Soldier Boy brought his right hand up, slapping the side of his own head with a tremendous clap. To Red 5, moving through the air, the massive hand descended like the hand of an angry god. Squelch! The 600-pound Mark IV tactical armor, condensed into the size of a rice grain, was incredibly dense. But caught between the immovable object of Soldier Boy's skull and the unstoppable force of his Tier 1 palm, the armor crumpled. Red 5 was crushed instantly. His internal organs turned to a microscopic paste within the tiny metal shell. Soldier Boy lowered his hand, wiping a tiny smudge of red and gray off his palm onto his pants. F***G-bugs, he muttered. Red 4 stepped out from the formation. He raised his armored hands, focusing the absolute totality of his Tier 3 telepathy directly at Soldier Boy's frontal lobe. He used his power as a blunt instrument, a psychic battering ram designed to cause a massive neurological short circuit. Sleep, the command echoed in the psychic plane, a localized hurricane of mental pressure. Soldier Boy gritted his teeth. A thick stream of blood instantly poured from his left nostril. The pressure inside his skull was immense, a white-hot migraine that threatened to shut down his motor functions. The world swam before his eyes, the edges of his vision going black. He stumbled, dropping to one knee, planting the edge of his shield on the ground to keep from falling over completely. Red 3 stepped forward, aiming both gauntlets at the kneeling, mentally suppressed hero. He unleashed a concentrated beam of absolute zero energy. The cryokinetic blast slammed into Soldier Boy, instantly coating him in a thick layer of opaque white ice. The temperature around him dropped so rapidly that the very air shattered, snow falling instantly from the sky. The ice forming a crystalline prison that locked Soldier Boy into his kneeling position, freezing his joints, encasing his shield, and creeping up over his face. "Do not let up," Homelander screamed, diving out of the sky. The remaining combatants realized this was their only window. Homelander landed 10 feet away, his eyes flaring with maximum intensity. He unleashed a continuous beam of heat vision directly at the block of ice encasing Soldier Boy. "Hit him with everything," Homelander roared. Maeve scrambled out of the rubble, her face a mask of cynical desperation. She knew if he broke out, they were all dead. She sprinted forward, leaping high into the air, and brought her heavy silver sword down with all her remaining strength, aiming to cleave the ice and the man inside it in two. Starlight, having recovered her breath, raised her hands. She channeled all her power into a searing beam of concentrated photons, blasting the ice block from the opposite side. Red 1 charged forward, rearing back a massive armored fist, and delivered a devastating haymaker to the side of the ice, adding massive kinetic trauma to the elemental assault. Red 2 teleported directly above the fray, dropping heavy chunks of concrete debris down onto the target like localized artillery strikes. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 88, Chapter 88, Soldier Boy 5 bonus chapter. Extreme heat, absolute cold, photon radiation, telepathic suppression, and brutal kinetic force, all focused on a single point. The ice hissed and boiled, melting and refreezing simultaneously under the conflicting powers of Homelander and Red 3. The ground beneath Soldier Boy began to liquefy into lava from the sheer energy of the assault. Inside the boiling prison of ice and steam, Soldier Boy was pushed to his absolute limit. The psychic pressure from Red 4 was agonizing. The heat vision was searing his skin. The kinetic impacts were jarring his bones. He was taking damage, real damage. His Tier 1 regeneration was working in overdrive, healing burns as they appeared, knitting micro-fractures in his bones as Maeve and Red 1 pounded against the ice. He felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his muscles. Fatigue. Even with Tier 1 super stamina, the concentrated output of the most powerful beings on Earth was forcing him to expend energy faster than his cells could replenish it. The ice cracked, Homelander's heat vision finally piercing the outer layer, burning a deep scorch mark across Soldier Boy's exposed shoulder. Soldier Boy let out a roar of pain that was muffled by the ice. "He's breaking," Homelander screamed, pushing more energy into his eyes. "Keep hitting him." Soldier Boy looked through the distorted ice. He saw Homelander's manic face. He saw Maeve's desperate swings. He saw the black-armored drones systematically applying force. Deep within the core of his chest, the radioactive mutation of his biology flared to life. He took all of his physical strength, all of his stamina, and he channeled it inward, feeding the radioactive furnace in his sternum. A low hum began to vibrate from within the block of ice. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the teeth and bones of everyone present. The ice encasing him began to glow with a blinding green. "What is that?" Starlight yelled over the shielding, her eyes from the intense light. Homelander stopped his heat vision. He stared at the glowing mass of ice. The hum was growing louder, rising in pitch, turning into a high-frequency whine that signaled catastrophic failure. Homelander recognized that sound. He had heard this sound before in the monitoring room at Vought Tower while reviewing the footage of the Russian base where Soldier Boy had been held before it was destroyed in a nuclear explosion. Pure terror seized Homelander's heart. He looked at Maeve, who was still swinging her sword. He looked at Starlight, who was staring in confusion. Homelander bent his knees and launched himself directly upward, breaking the sound barrier instantly. He shot into the sky like a rocket, a desperate streak of blue and red fleeing the blast zone at maximum velocity. Starlight looked up, her jaw dropping as she watched their leader abandon them without a second thought. He left us, she whispered, her glowing hands dropping to her sides. Queen Maeve stopped swinging her sword. She leaned heavily on the hilt, her chest heaving as she looked up at the disappearing contrail in the sky. Typical, Maeve scoffed, a cynical smile touching her bruised lips. She looked back at the glowing green ice. Red 2 reached out, attempting to grab Red 1 and Red 3 to teleport them clear. He was a millisecond too late. Soldier Boy released the lock. "If you want to die with me," Soldier Boy's voice boomed from within the ice, distorted and resonant with nuclear power. "Die." It was the violent expansion of a localized star. A dome of radioactive plasma erupted from Soldier Boy's chest, instantly vaporizing the ice that held him. The shockwave hit Red 4 first. The telepath, standing 30 feet away, simply ceased to exist, his black armor and the biological matter inside flashing into a shadow, burned onto the asphalt before being wiped away entirely. Red 2, Red 1, and Red 3 were consumed an instant later. The carbon nanotube armor, designed to withstand kinetic impacts, offered zero protection against nuclear vaporization. The 3 clones dissolved into ash, their artificial biology breaking down at the atomic level, returning to the gray mist of their creation before being permanently eradicated by the heat. Starlight screamed, raising her arms in a futile gesture of defense. The blinding green light washed over her. Her durable skin, which had deflected bullets, blistered and boiled away in a fraction of a second. She felt a singular moment of blinding agony, a terrifying realization of her own mortality, before her nervous system was incinerated. The girl from Iowa, who only wanted to save people, turned into a pillar of white-hot ash and scattered to the wind. Queen Maeve stood her ground. As the wall of radioactive plasma rushed toward her, she stared into the blinding light, her grip firm on her sword. F***G finally, she whispered. The blast consumed her. Her legendary invulnerability held for exactly 1/10 of a second longer than the others, her silhouette remaining visible in the blinding light for a heartbreaking moment before her flesh and bone gave way, atomized by the apocalyptic heat. The blast wave continued outward, expanding in a devastating hemisphere. It vaporized the burning tanks, the concrete bunkers, the asphalt, and the remaining corpses of the military personnel. It scoured the valley floor, turning the earth into a glowing plain of radioactive glass. And then, as quickly as it had erupted, the energy dissipated, rushing upward into the sky in a massive mushroom cloud of green and black smoke. Silence returned to the valley. 30,000 feet above the earth, hovering in the freezing air of the stratosphere, Homelander looked down. His chest was heaving, his breathing ragged. He stared at the glowing crater where the military base used to be. The mushroom cloud was rising toward him, a silent testament to the power of the man he had called father. He looked for the thermal signatures of Maeve, of Starlight, of the armored soldiers. There was nothing, just the blinding white heat of the irradiated crater. They were all dead. The 7 was dead, the Red Unit was dead, Soldier Boy was dead. Homelander floated in the silence. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 89, Chapter 89, Spencer Industries. Spencer Industries Executive Office. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes. The phantom sensation of the nuclear detonation, the final act of my Soldier Boy clone, faded from my synaptic network. Clone was vaporized in his own glorious inferno, taking the vast majority of Vought's premier assets and the military's rogue command structure with him. I opened my eyes and called up the interface. A blue holographic screen materialized in the air above my mahogany desk. The notifications were already queuing, a cascade of digital confirmation for the carnage I had orchestrated. Plunder Q, processing multiple high-tier targets. Soup neutralized, Queen Maeve Tier 2. Powers detected. Super strength, super defense, super speed, enhanced senses, regeneration. Soup neutralized, Starlight Tier 2. Powers detected: electricity absorption, photokinesis, super strength, super defense, enhanced senses, regeneration. Soup neutralized, A-Train Tier 2. Powers detected: super speed, super strength, super defense, accelerated metabolism, enhanced senses, regeneration. Soup neutralized, the Deep Tier 3. Powers detected: aquatic respiration, marine life communication, super strength, super defense, enhanced senses, regeneration. Vought's primary defense force was little more than a collection of heavily armored bruisers, with a few elemental parlor tricks mixed in. I already possessed Tier 1 iterations of every physical enhancement listed, and I had no need for aquatic respiration or the ability to glow in the dark. Convert all to experience points. Processing Tier 2 conversions, Queen Maeve. 5 powers x 3000 XP equals 15,000 XP. Processing Tier 2 conversions, Starlight. 6 powers x 3000 XP equals 18,000 XP. Processing Tier 2 conversions, A-Train. 6 powers x 3000 XP equals 18,000 XP. Processing Tier 3 conversions, the Deep. 6 powers x 1500 XP equals 9,000 XP. Total XP GAINED, 60,000 XP. Previous balance, 80,600 XP. Current total XP, 140,600 XP. I stared at the final number, 140,600 experience points. It was an astronomical sum. Initiate upgrade protocols, I commanded the silent interface. Sequential progression to Tier 1 for all remaining abilities. Acknowledged, commencing sequential upgrades. Power selected, Flight Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Flight Tier 1. Aerial velocity now matches terrestrial super speed, Mach 30. Complete disregard for atmospheric friction and gravitational pull. The sensation was a sudden unmooring of my internal compass. I could breach the stratosphere in seconds. Power selected, cloning Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Cloning Tier 1. Maximum simultaneous clone manifestation increased to 100. All clones possess 100% of the original host's Tier 1 abilities. Hive mind cognitive bandwidth optimized for absolute synchronization. A profound vastness opened within my consciousness. It was as if my mind had suddenly expanded into a grand cathedral, waiting to be filled. 100 iterations of myself, each wielding the power to tear a city apart, all functioning under a single will. Power selected, telekinesis Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Telekinesis Tier 1. Lifting and manipulation capacity increased to 1,000 tons. Molecular level fine motor control enabled. The phantom muscles in my mind flexed with world-breaking tension. 1,000 tons. I could lift a naval destroyer from the harbor. I could halt a plummeting commercial airliner. The physical world around me felt suddenly malleable, like wet clay waiting to be shaped by my thoughts. Power selected, Immortality Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Immortality Tier 1. Cellular senescence halted entirely. Maximum functional lifespan expanded to 10,000 years in absolute prime physical condition. A resonant calm washed over my biology. The ticking clock that hounded every living creature simply stopped. 10 millennia. Empires would rise and fall, oceans would dry, and I would remain unchanged by the ravages of time. Power selected, Electrokinesis Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Electrokinesis Tier 1. Omega level output. capable of generating localized thunderstorms, global EMPs, and plasma generation equivalent to the core of a star. My nervous system lit up like a fiber optic network. The static electricity in the air bowed toward me. I was capable of plunging continents into darkness or incinerating a mountain range with a thought. Power selected, Enhanced Senses Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Enhanced Senses, Tier 1. Auditory, olfactory, optical, and tactile reception maximized to Homelander equivalent baselines. X-ray, macroscopic, and microscopic vision enabled. The world snapped into overwhelming focus. I could hear the microscopic mites crawling through the fibers of my carpet. I could smell the distinct chemical composition of the ink on the documents sitting in the office 3 floors below me. I blinked and the opaque drywall of my office faded, revealing the structural steel, the copper wiring, and the bustling city miles away, all with absolute clarity. I quickly dialed the sensory input back, filtering the noise to maintain my sanity. Power selected, Shapeshifting Tier 3. Upgrade to Tier 2 cost, 3,000 XP. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Total cost, 8,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 8,000 XP. Upgrades complete. Shapeshifting, Tier 1. Instantaneous transition. Complete DNA, vocal, and fingerprint replication. Capable of perfectly mimicking any human form, including their currently worn non-organic clothing attire. My physical form felt utterly fluid, like a canvas waiting to be painted. I could become anyone, perfectly, down to their genetic code. Power selected, Size Alteration Tier 3. Upgrade to Tier 2 cost, 3,000 XP. Upgrade to Tier 1 cost, 5,000 XP. Total cost, 8,000 XP. Proceed. Execute. Deducting 8,000 XP. Upgrades complete. Size Alteration, Tier 1, Dimensional Parameters expanded. Minimum scale, 1 micrometer. Maximum scale, 1 kilometer. Mass conservation optimized for both extremes. 1 micrometer, I could exist on the cellular level. 1 kilometer, I could step over skyscrapers. I let out a long breath. The transformation was complete. System, I whispered into the quiet room. Final status. The blue interface flashed one last time, displaying the absolute summit of evolution. Final status. Host, Arian Spencer. Remaining XP, 94,600. Powers. Flight Tier 1. Cloning Tier 1. Telepathy Tier 1. Biokinesis Tier 1. Telekinesis Tier 1. Immortality Tier 1. Cryokinesis Tier 1. Super Speed Tier 1. Resurrection Tier 1. Teleportation Tier 1. Regeneration Tier 1. Shapeshifting Tier 1. Electrokinesis Tier 1. Size Alteration Tier 1. Super Stamina Tier 1. Super Defense Tier 1. Super Strength Tier 1. Radiation Blast Tier 1. Disempowerment Tier 1. Enhanced Senses Tier 1. Goal, 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 90, Chapter 90, Kimiko Miyashiro, bonus chapter. A soft knock at the heavy mahogany door of my office pulled me back from my internal reverence. I swiped my hand, dismissing the screen. Come in, I said. The door opened. One of my clones, dressed in a security suit, stepped into the room. Slung over his shoulder, hanging limp like a rag doll, was a young Japanese man. Kenji Miyashiro. Clone walked forward and unceremoniously deposited the unconscious man into the plush leather guest chair opposite my desk. Clone gave me a brisk nod, then turned and exited the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. I stood up and walked around the desk, looking down at Kimiko's brother. He looked exhausted, his face bruised and pale from his time with the Shining Light Liberation Army. He was a soup with telekinetic powers and a head full of radicalized anti-Western propaganda. I reached out and placed my right hand firmly against his chest. Disempowerment Tier 1. The process was invisible, but to my enhanced senses, it was a violent extraction. I felt the volatile chemical signature of compound V suffusing his cells. With a flex of my will, I reached into his biology and gripped the chemical structure of the drug. I pulled. Kenji's unconscious body arched backward in the chair, a choked gasp escaping his lips as his nervous system experienced the sudden withdrawal of the mutagen. A faint blue aura seemed to evaporate from his pores, dissolving harmlessly into the air. His muscles lost their unnatural density. His heart rate settled into a normal human rhythm. He was just a human again. I moved my hand from his chest to his forehead, pressing my fingers against his temples. Telepathy Tier 1. I stepped into the chaotic architecture of his mind. I found the memories of his torture, the grueling combat training, the deeply ingrained hatred for Vought, America, and the establishment. I found the fanatical devotion to the shining light cause. With absolute precision, I began to excise the rot. I deleted the faces of his radical handlers. I scrubbed the ideology from his frontal lobe, unraveling the neuropathways that triggered his violent tendencies. It was like editing a complex line of code. I didn't erase his love for his sister, nor the memory of their childhood. I preserved the core of who he was. Then I implanted a deep desire for peace, a profound exhaustion with fighting. I seeded the idea that his primary goal in life was to settle down, to find a quiet job, to protect his sister, and to live a thoroughly unremarkable normal life. I built a psychological firewall around these new core tenets, ensuring they felt entirely organic and born of his own free will. I withdrew from his mind, the telepathic surgery complete in a matter of seconds, and I stepped back and snapped my fingers sharply in front of his face. Kenji gasped, his eyes flying open. He jerked upright in the chair, his breathing rapid. He looked around my opulent office, his eyes wide with confusion. He looked at his hands, flexing them, sensing the absence of the telekinetic hum he had carried for years, though he couldn't quite articulate what was missing. Where am I? He stammered in Japanese, looking up at me with panic. Who are you? Relax, Kenji, I said smoothly, speaking flawless Japanese. I offered him a warm smile, pouring every ounce of my practiced charisma into the expression. He pressed himself back against the leather chair. How do you know my name? The Shining Light? Did they? The people who took you are dead, I interrupted gently. My security teams intercepted your transport. Your sister asked me to find you. I promised her I would. Kenji froze. The panic in his eyes was instantly eclipsed by a desperate hope. Kimiko, you know Kimiko, is she alive? She is, I nodded, checking my watch. In fact, I sent word to her the moment my men secured you. She should be arriving from the penthouse any minute. As if summoned by the words, the heavy office doors swung open. Kimiko stood in the doorway. She was wearing a simple yellow sundress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked healthy and vibrant. Her eyes landed on the boy sitting in the chair. Kenji. The word left her lips in a trembling whisper. Kenji whipped his head around. He stared at her, tears instantly welling in his eyes. He stumbled out of the chair, his human legs uncoordinated. Kimiko. They collided in the center of my office, a crushing embrace. Kenji buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing openly, while Kimiko held the back of his head, her own tears tracking down her cheeks. You're alive, Kenji wept. I thought they killed you. I am safe, Kenji, Kimiko said, her voice slightly raspy but clear and beautifully articulate. We are both safe now. Kenji pulled back slightly, looking at her with absolute shock. You are speaking. Kimiko, your voice. Kimiko smiled through her tears, reaching up to gently touch her own throat. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes filled with a depth of affection and gratitude that transcended words. He healed me, Kenji, she said softly, keeping her eyes on me. He saved me. He gave me my voice back. She reached out her hand toward me. I stepped forward and took it, intertwining our fingers. Kenji looked from our joined hands up to my face, his expression a mix of awe and lingering confusion. Who are you? Kenji, Kimiko said, her voice proud. This is Arian Spencer. He is my boyfriend, and he is the man who rescued us. She looked back at her brother. You can trust him. Kenji looked at the sheer opulence of the office, the undeniable power radiating from my posture, and then at the peaceful happiness radiating from his sister. The telepathic seeds I had planted bloomed perfectly. His shoulders dropped, the last of his tension draining away. "Thank you," Kenji said, bowing deeply at the waist. "Thank you, Spencer-san, for my sister." "You are family now, Kenji," I said warmly, "and family takes care of each other. I know you've been through hell, but that's over. I've arranged for a townhouse for you in a quiet neighborhood in Queens." Kenji blinked, overwhelmed. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," I smiled. "But if you want a fresh start, Spencer Industries is always looking for reliable personnel in our logistics and archiving departments. It's normal work. A good salary, full benefits. The job is yours if you want it." Kimiko squeezed my hand, a silent thank you before turning to her brother. "Take it, Kenji," she urged gently. Kenji looked at his hands, his powerless hands. He felt a profound exhaustion and a yearning for the peace I was offering. He looked up, tears shining in his eyes. "I accept. I just want to live a normal life." "Then a normal life is exactly what you shall have," I said. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 91, Chapter 91, Legends bonus chapter. Vought headquarters intelligence room. Stan Edgar stood in the subterranean gloom of the Vought intelligence hub, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture as rigid as a marble column. The frantic energy that had consumed the room an hour ago had evaporated into a horrified silence. The analysts sat frozen at their stations, staring up at the primary monitor. Graves stood beside Edgar, his face the color of wet ash. He was holding a tablet, his hands trembling so badly he had to rest it on the console to read it. On the massive screen, the Argus satellite footage of the Appalachian military base played in a continuous loop. It displayed the thermal imaging of the ultimate clash. They had watched Homelander, Queen Maeve, A-Train, Starlight, and Deep descend upon the base. And then had watched the Red Unit engage the Seven in a battle that defied comprehension. They had watched the Red Unit utilize telekinesis, absolute zero cryokinesis, teleportation, and size alteration to fight the world's greatest heroes to a standstill. And then, the ghost of the Cold War had crashed into the fray. Soldier Boy. The thermal camera captured the visceral melee. Edgar watched, his face unreadable, as Soldier Boy crushed the Deep's chest. He watched as A-Train was decapitated by the heavy brass shield. He watched the chaotic team up between the surviving members of the Seven and the Red Unit as they tried to put down the rampaging legend. And finally, he watched the thermal bloom. The screen flared at absolute white as Soldier Boy unleashed his nuclear payload. The blast wave erased the Red Unit. It erased Starlight. It evaporated Queen Maeve. When the thermal sensors finally adjusted to the cooling crater, there was only one heat signature left hovering in the stratosphere above the devastation. Homelander. "Sir, the Seven," Graves whispered, his voice cracking, breaking the heavy silence in the room. "They are all dead. The tactical team is also dead." Stan Edgar stared at the glowing crater on the screen. To Graves, it was the apocalypse. The destruction of Vought's premier product line, the loss of billions of dollars in marketing, merchandising, and corporate security. But to Stan Edgar, playing the grand game of corporate chess, the board had just been miraculously simplified. "A tragedy," Graves, Edgar said, his baritone voice utterly devoid of grief. "An unmitigated tragedy." Graves turned to look at his CEO in disbelief. "Sir, we just lost the core of our defense infrastructure. Vought stock is going to plummet the moment this leaks." "The stock will do no such thing," Graves, Edgar interrupted, turning his dark eyes onto the intelligence director. "Because we are going to control the leak, and we are going to author the narrative." Edgar gestured elegantly to the frozen image of the nuclear blast. "General Raddock's rogue faction is entirely eradicated," Edgar stated, ticking off the points on his fingers. "The Red Unit, the illegally manufactured super soldiers threatening our monopoly, have been vaporized, and the unmanageable relic known as Soldier Boy has permanently eliminated himself from the equation. The threats to this company have been surgically removed. But at the cost of the Seven," Graves argued, gesturing helplessly at the screen. The 7, Edgar corrected coldly, were a liability. A Train was a drug addict. Deep was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. Maeve was broken and cynical. And Starlight was a naive variable we could not control. They were depreciating assets, Graves. Edgar straightened his tie, his mind already churning out the press releases, the shareholder letters, the merchandising spin. You will immediately draft a statement for the global press, Edgar commanded softly. The brave heroes of the 7, Queen Maeve, Starlight, A-Train, and Deep, sacrificed their lives tonight in a heroic effort to stop a radicalized military faction and a brainwashed Soviet weapon from detonating a nuclear device on American soil. Graves stared at him, the sheer scale of the manipulation washing over him. You want to make them martyrs. I want to make them legends, Edgar corrected. Legends sell movies, comic books, and congressional votes. Homelander, the sole survivor, the grieving leader, will be elevated to the status of a living legendary hero in the eyes of the public. Edgar turned his back on the monitors, walking toward the elevator. Lock down this footage. Initiate the PR rollout in exactly 4 hours. Tomorrow morning, when the market opens, our stock is going to soar on a wave of tear-soaked American patriotism. White House Situation Room. President Robert Singer sat slumped in his chair, his head resting heavily in his hands. The styrofoam coffee cup in front of him had been crushed. General Higgins looked aged and hollowed out. He was staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, his jaw slack. Director Rayner was pacing near the back wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, chewing nervously on her lower lip. Grace Mallory stood at the head of the table. She looked exhausted, the deep lines around her eyes carved in sharp relief by the harsh fluorescent lights. She closed the classified after-action report and laid it flat on the table. That is the final assessment, Mr. President, Mallory said, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge, replaced by a weary resignation. Summarize it for me one more time, Grace, Singer muttered without looking up. Just so I can be sure I'm not trapped in a nightmare. Mallory let out a slow breath. At 200 hours, Vought deployed a Black Ops tactical team to Fort Benning. We still do not have a confirmed motive for this action, but they initiated a hostile massacre of the 4th Special Forces Group utilizing advanced sonic weaponry. General Higgins flinched at the mention of his slaughtered men, closing his eyes. Shortly after the Vought incursion, Mallory continued. Homelander and the rest of the 7 arrived on site. They escalated the conflict, engaging in a wholesale slaughter of the remaining military personnel. And then the platoon intervened. Rayner interjected, pacing faster. Yes, Mallory nodded. Our satellite intercepts indicate that the Phantom Platoon, the retired operators we attempted to contact, teleported into the base. It appears they attempted to defend the surviving military personnel from the 7. Mallory paused, tapping the closed file. And then, Soldier Boy arrived, she finished grimly. He engaged both the 7 and the Phantom Platoon. The conflict culminated in Soldier Boy initiating a localized nuclear detonation. The blast radius encompassed the entire base. Casualties? Singer asked, finally lifting his head. His eyes were bloodshot. General Raddock and his entire command are dead, Mallory stated flatly. Vought tactical team is dead. Phantom Platoon, our only potential leverage, was vaporized. Queen Maeve, Starlight, A-Train, and Deep are confirmed deceased. Soldier Boy's biological signature was destroyed in the blast. And Homelander, Higgins rasped, opening his eyes to glare at Mallory. Homelander survived, Mallory said, the words falling like lead weights in the silent room. He evacuated the immediate blast zone moments prior to detonation. He is currently back at Vought Tower. We lost, Singer whispered, leaning back in his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. We lost everything. The platoon was our only chip, Bob Rayner said, her voice frantic. And Vought knows it, Higgins grunted, slamming a fist weakly onto the table. They wiped out an American military base, and we can't do a damn thing about it. If we accuse them, Homelander will just say he was defending the country from a rogue general and a Russian weapon, and the public will believe him. They hold all the cards, Mallory agreed, her voice bitter. Homelander is the only survivor. Vought is going to spin this into the greatest tragedy and triumph in American history. The 7 died to keep us safe. Singer let out a long sigh. The political reality was a tidal wave he could no longer hold back. The superhuman military integration bill, Singer said softly. It goes to the floor tomorrow, Rayner reminded him. With the public reeling from the heroic sacrifice of the 7, Congress will pass it unanimously, Singer muttered. Singer looked at Higgins, then at Mallory, the fight completely drained out of him. We have no leverage, President of the United States conceded, his voice cracking with the admission of absolute surrender. We have no weapons left to fight them. Singer stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table. Draft a statement of profound condolence from the White House, Singer ordered his staff, his eyes vacant. We will publicly mourn the loss of the 7. P.S. The novel is already completed on Patreon. If you want to read the whole story at once, there are 10 advanced chapters available. www.patreon.com/drrajnovel. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 92, Chapter 92, Homelander bonus chapter. The press briefing room on the 77th floor of Vought Tower was a cathedral built for corporate worship, but today it had been transformed into a mausoleum. The usual bright lights had been dialed down to a somber glow. The massive digital screens that flanked the stage, usually looping triumphant montages of superhero endorsements and cinematic trailers, were locked onto a single image. The Vought crest, cast in mournful shadows, draped with a digital black ribbon. The podium at the center of the stage was bare wood, stripped of its usual flashy corporate branding. The room was packed. Over 300 journalists, reporters, and camera operators were crammed shoulder to shoulder, but the silence was absolute. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage parted. Homelander stepped out. The sound of 100 camera shutters clicking in rapid succession sounded like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Flashbulbs strobed, washing his face in staccato bursts of white light. He walked slowly, his posture rigid. His immaculate blue suit was pristine, the gold eagles on his shoulders polished to a mirror shine, but his American flag cape hung still. His jaw was clenched, his lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes, usually a vibrant blue, looked hollow with a faint redness that spoke of a man who had spent the night staring into an abyss. It was the performance of a masterpiece of sociopathic mimicry. Homelander reached the podium. He placed his gloved hands on the wooden edges, gripping the lectern tightly. He lowered his head, staring down at the polished wood for a long minute. The cameras kept clicking. When he finally looked up, he made sure the primary network cameras had a perfect view of the single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Yesterday, Homelander began, his voice a raspy whisper. He cleared his throat, leaning closer to the microphone. Yesterday, the world woke up to a nightmare. He paused, letting the tremor in his vocal cords resonate through the massive speaker system. We, the 7, he stopped, shaking his head slowly, closing his eyes as if the words themselves were physical blades cutting his throat. My family, my brothers, my sisters, they are gone. A collective gasp rippled through the press corps. They had heard the rumors, the leaks, and the wild internet speculations. But hearing the invincible soup confirm it out loud shattered the last illusion of safety in the room. Queen Maeve, Black Noir, Atrain, Deep, and our brightest light, Starlight. Homelander recited the names slowly, imbuing each one with a heavy gravity. They were murdered. The room erupted into a cacophony of shouted questions, journalists surging forward against the velvet ropes. Homelander, who is responsible? Was it the Z-Drug cartel? Is America under attack? Homelander raised a single hand. The authority in the gesture was absolute. The room instantly fell silent again, the journalists shrinking back. They were murdered, Homelander continued, his voice gaining volume, shifting from broken grief to a righteous anger, by a radicalized faction of our own military. A faction that stole classified technology, a faction that allied themselves with a ghost from the past, a Russian brainwashed weapon of mass destruction that we all thought was buried in the Cold War. He gripped the podium harder, the wood groaning faintly under the pressure. This faction wanted to tear down everything we stand for. They wanted to replace the heroes you love with programmable monsters. And when my family discovered their plot in the Appalachian Mountains, they didn't wait for backup. They threw themselves into the fire. Homelander looked directly into the lens of the center camera, speaking to the millions sitting in their living rooms, clutching their pearls. Maeve, she fought until her last breath, shielding the innocent with her own body. A train ran into the heart of the enemy lines to disarm their munitions. Deep held the perimeter against impossible odds. Noir, my oldest friend, stood by my side and took the blade meant for me. Homelander's voice cracked perfectly on the last syllable. He bowed his head, letting another tear fall. He had punched a hole straight through Noir's chest, but the lie tasted sweeter than the truth. And Starlight, he whispered, a tragic smile touching his lips. She drew the enemy's fire, sacrificing her own radiant light so that others might live. He looked up, his eyes blazing now with the manufactured fire of a patriot demanding vengeance. They faced a nuclear detonation, and they took the brunt of it. They absorbed the blast to save the cities beyond the valley. They gave their lives so that you could keep yours. He let the silence hang. Several reporters in the front row were visibly weeping, wiping their eyes with the backs of their hands. I am the only one left, Homelander said, his voice dropping to a low register. I have lost my family, but I promise you this. He leaned into the microphone, his blue eyes boring into the soul of the nation. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. I will carry the weight of the Seven on my shoulders alone. I will hunt down every last conspirator and every last radical who seeks to harm this country. You are not unprotected. I am here. I will always be here. He stepped back from the podium. He turned, his cape dragging heavily on the floor, and disappeared back through the velvet curtains. Within 4 minutes of the broadcast concluding, the internet became a global monument to grief. Stan Edgar's meticulously crafted narrative, delivered through Homelander's flawless sociopathic performance, hit the global consciousness like a psychological superweapon. On VotFace, the social media platform dominated by the company, the timelines were a scrolling river of black squares and crying emojis. At Real Patriot 99, I can't stop crying. Maeve was my hero. She was so strong. They literally took a nuke for us. Remember the Seven, Homelander is our shield. At Iowa Girl Fan, Annie loudly, she just wanted to help people. She was too pure for this world. The military needs to be dismantled for this. Treason, Starlight sacrifice. At Speedster Kicks, A-Train went out like a king, running into the fire. R.I.P. to the fastest man alive. Highbroken. On Reddit, the political subreddits were a raging inferno of conspiracy and misplaced anger. Vought's bot farms had seeded the narrative perfectly, fanning the flames of anti-military sentiment. U/Truthseeker45. Think about it. The government has been trying to pass the SOUP military bill for a year now. What better way to prove they don't need SUPs than by building their own secret army and killing the Seven? Homelander just exposed the deep state. U/Vought stock bro. If you aren't buying Vought stock right now, you're an idiot. Homelander just became a living martyr survivor. He has a 100% approval rating. It's a tragedy, but financially, it's the biggest bull run in history. You Deep Thoughts, pour one out for Deep. He gets a lot of hate, but he stood the line. Ocean Man went out on dry land fighting terrorists. Respect. The hashtag #We Are With Homelander reached 3 billion impressions in under an hour. Digital artists were already churning out speed paintings of the Seven, standing against a glowing green mushroom cloud, angelic halos hovering over their heads. The public turned their fear of the unknown into a fanatic devotion to the sole surviving Homelander. The television news networks were no different. Objective journalism had been entirely eclipsed by performative mourning. P.S. The novel is already completed on Patreon. If you want to read the whole story at once, there are 10 advanced chapters available. www.patreon.com/drrajnovel. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 93, Chapter 93, VNN bonus chapter. On VNN Vought News Network, Cameron Coleman was seated at his polished glass desk. The normally high-energy anchor was uncharacteristically subdued. He wasn't wearing his usual bright red tie. He wore a solid black. "We are coming to you live on the darkest day in American history," Coleman said, his voice thick, his eyes glistening with real or incredibly well-acted tears. He looked down at his desk, shaking his head. "I have sat at this desk and reported on natural disasters, on terror attacks, but nothing could have prepared me for the words Homelander spoke today." The screen split, showing a black and white montage of the Seven smiling, saving people. Soft piano music played under the broadcast. "They were the best of us," Coleman continued, looking back up at the camera. "Queen Maeve, a symbol of unyielding strength and feminine power. Black Noir, the silent sentinel who watched over our sleep. A train whose heart beat for the inner city. Deep, the guardian of our shores. And Starlight? Sweet Starlight, whose light was extinguished far too soon." Coleman picked up a piece of paper, his hands trembling slightly. "To the rogue military operatives who orchestrated this cowardly ambush, know this. You failed. You took their lives, but you immortalized their legacy. And you left the one man you should have feared most." The camera zoomed in on Coleman's face, his expression hardening into absolute resolve. "Homelander stands alone, but he stands for all of us. And Vought International has assured this network that the perpetrators, whoever remains of their treasonous faction, will face a justice so absolute it will echo through eternity. May God bless the Seven, and may God bless Homelander." On the rival network, generic political experts were engaged in a frantic debate. "The implications are staggering," Tom, a gray-haired defense analyst said, adjusting his earpiece. "If a rogue general was utilizing unauthorized SUPs to assassinate American corporate assets, the entire chain of command is compromised. President has to answer for this. How did a shadow army operate on domestic soil without the commander-in-chief knowing?" "It forces the hand of the Senate," the anchor replied solemnly. The SUP military integration bill was facing pushback. After today, after the Seven took a nuclear blast to protect a civilian population center, any senator who votes against giving Vought the defense contract is committing political suicide. The public won't allow it. They want Homelander in charge of national security, not the Pentagon. Upper East Side. The midday air in Manhattan was carrying the chaotic energy of 8 million people trying to process the tragedy on their screens while continuing the mundane tasks of their lives. Outside an open-air Italian bistro on Fifth Avenue, the world kept turning. Waiters in crisp white aprons carried plates of truffle risotto and branzino to wealthy patrons sitting under forest green awnings. At a corner table, closest to the street, sat 3 men. They were impossibly handsome, exuding a magnetic charisma that caused heads to turn and waitresses to linger. The man on the left, Julian, had aristocratic features, dark hair swept back flawlessly, and wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white t-shirt. He possessed a calm presence. The man in the middle, Felix, possessed an athletic build, his hair a sun-kissed blonde. He wore a fitted leather jacket and possessed an easygoing smile that never quite left his face. The man on the right, Elias, was striking, with piercing gray eyes and sharp cheekbones, dressed in a minimalist black turtleneck. He radiated a quiet energy, like a coiled spring. They were Arian's clones. "The branzino is acceptable," Julian said calmly, slicing a delicate piece of the fish with his fork. "It's fantastic," Felix laughed, leaning back in his chair, taking a sip of sparkling water. "Everything is fantastic today." "Focus, Felix," Elias murmured, his gray eyes scanning the avenue. "We are not here to enjoy the culinary arts." Less than a block away, at the top of a slight incline on Fifth Avenue, a 20-ton municipal garbage truck was grinding its gears. The driver, a weary city employee named Hector, pumped the heavy brake pedal. It went straight to the floorboard without an ounce of resistance. Hector panicked. He pumped it again. Nothing. A hydraulic line had ruptured, spewing pressurized fluid onto the asphalt. The truck, carrying 10 tons of compacted refuse, began to accelerate down the incline. "Look out, brakes are gone, move," Hector screamed, leaning on the massive air horn. "HOONK. HOONK." The blaring horn cut through the ambient noise of the avenue. Pedestrians on the sidewalks froze, looking up the street. Directly in the path of the accelerating, out-of-control behemoth was a silver minivan. A mother was frantically trying to unbuckle her two young children from their car seats in the back, oblivious to the roaring mountain of steel hurtling toward her rear bumper. Beyond the minivan was the intersection, currently flooded with dozens of pedestrians crossing with the walk signal. The garbage truck hit 40 miles per hour, an unstoppable kinetic missile. Showtime, Felix grinned. Super speed tier 2. To the patrons of the bistro, there was only a sudden gust of wind that flipped the tablecloths and knocked over a dozen wine glasses. Felix moved at Mach 1. He was a blur of motion, visible only as a distorted streak of air. He reached the intersection in a fraction of a second. He moved like a sheepdog, wrapping his arms around waists and shoulders, depositing 5, 10, 15 people onto the safety of the far sidewalk in the blink of an eye. He appeared beside the minivan a millisecond before the garbage truck made impact. He ripped the sliding side door clean off its tracks, grabbed the terrified mother and her two children in a secure hold, and zipped them 50 feet away, setting them down gently on the pavement just as the truck struck the van. Crunch! The garbage truck obliterated the silver minivan, folding its rear end into the driver's seat in an explosion of glass and tearing metal. The impact barely slowed the 20-ton truck. It pushed the mangled wreckage of the van forward, plowing straight toward the crowded outdoor seating of the bistro. "My turn," Julian said, his voice calm. He stood up from the table, stepping out from under the awning. He raised his right hand, his palm facing the oncoming avalanche of steel. Telekinesis Tier 2. A shimmering wave of blue energy erupted from his palm. The invisible wall of telekinetic force slammed into the grill of the garbage truck. The screech of tortured metal was deafening. The truck's rear tires lifted off the ground as its forward momentum met the absolute resistance of Julian's mind. The massive vehicle shuddered violently, the chassis groaning as it was physically halted in its tracks, pushing the crushed minivan into the asphalt, digging a deep trench. Julian gritted his teeth, putting on a show of physical strain, his brow furrowing as he held the immense weight at bay, suspending the truck's crushed front end 2 feet in the air. "Elias," Julian called out, his voice strained for dramatic effect. "Engine block, it's going to combust." Hector, the driver, was trapped in the cab, screaming as the engine beneath him whined, redlining under the impossible strain, smoke pouring from the hood. P.S. The novel is already completed on Patreon. If you want to read the whole story at once, there are 10 advanced chapters available. www.patreon.com/drrajnovel. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 94, Chapter 94, Trio bonus chapter. Elias stood up. He walked casually toward the suspended truck. He raised 2 fingers, pointing them directly at the roaring engine block of the garbage truck. Electrokinesis, Tier 2. A brilliant arc of blue-white lightning leaped from his fingertips, cracking through the air with the sharp smell of ozone. The lightning struck the hood of the truck, bypassing the metal exterior and diving straight into the engine's electrical system, the alternator, and the battery matrix. Zap! Cracked! The roar of the engine died instantly, replaced by a shower of harmless sparks. The electrical systems were entirely fried, the combustion cycle halted permanently without igniting the fuel lines. Julian let out a theatrical breath and slowly lowered his hand. The garbage truck dropped the remaining 2 feet, its front tires hitting the asphalt with a heavy thud. Silence fell over Fifth Avenue. The patrons of the bistro, the pedestrians on the sidewalk, the mother clutching her children, they all stared in stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. A slow clap that quickly spread, rippling through the crowd until the street erupted into a deafening roar of applause and cheers. Felix, standing near the mother he had saved, gave a 2-fingered salute to the crowd, flashing a 1,000,000-watt smile. Elias lowered his hand, slipping it casually back into the pocket of his slacks, his face impassive but undeniably heroic. Julian, playing the noble leader, simply nodded to the crowd, walking over to the truck's cab to effortlessly rip the jammed door open and help the trembling driver out onto the street. The age of the smartphone meant privacy was a myth. A dozen people were already live streaming. Within 2 minutes, the wail of sirens signaled the arrival of the NYPD and emergency services. But faster than the police were the local news crews. A news van from a local affiliate, caught in the traffic jam just 2 blocks down, had seen the commotion and sent a reporter sprinting up the avenue with a cameraman in tow. A young reporter shoved a microphone into Julian's face as the 3 clones regrouped on the sidewalk, looking immaculate despite the chaos. Excuse me, live for Channel 4 News," the reporter panted. What just happened here? Who are you?" Julian offered a warm smile. It was the smile of a man born to be on a poster. "Just citizens in the right place at the right time," Julian said, his voice calming. "A hydraulic failure on the municipal vehicle. We intervened before it could reach the pedestrian crossing." "Intervened?" the reporter said incredulously, gesturing to the mangled truck. "You stopped a 20-ton truck with your power. He shot lightning, and she pointed to Felix. "He moved faster than A-Train." Felix stepped into the frame, slinging an arm around Julian's shoulder. "Hey now, let's not exaggerate. I'm quick, but A-Train is a legend. May he rest in peace." He gave a respectful nod to the camera. Are you licensed heroes?" the reporter pressed, the cameraman zooming in on their ridiculously perfect faces. "Are you with Vought?" "No, ma'am," Elias said, stepping forward, his piercing eyes meeting the lens. "We're not affiliated with anyone. Not yet. We actually just awakened recently," Julian lied. "We've been keeping our heads down, trying to figure out what these abilities mean, how to control them." But after watching the news this morning, Felix chimed in, his tone turning serious, perfectly mimicking the national mood. "After seeing the tragedy, seeing what the 7 sacrificed for us, we realized we couldn't just sit on the sidelines anymore." Julian nodded solemnly. "Homelander can't carry the weight of the entire world on his shoulders alone, especially not while he's grieving his family. We want to help." "You want to join Vought?" the reporter asked, her eyes wide with the scoop of a lifetime. "If they'd have us," Elias said, a quiet intensity in his voice. "We want to train under the best. We want to learn from Homelander. We want to honor the legacy of the heroes we lost today." "What are your names?" the reporter demanded. Julian looked at the camera, a picture of humble nobility. "I'm Julian. This is Felix and Elias, but names aren't important right now. What's important is that everyone on this street is going home to their families tonight. We're just glad we could do our part," Felix smiled, winking at the camera. The police cordons were closing in, pushing the press back. "Thank you," Julian said, waving politely as the 3 of them stepped back into the crowd, maintaining the illusion of normalcy, leaving the reporter staring after them in awe. The internet had barely processed the grief of the morning before it was violently hijacked by the hope of the afternoon. The cell phone videos of the 5th Avenue rescue hit the web from a dozen different angles. The speed, the power, the sheer charisma of the 3 unknown men saving a crowd of innocent people was a viral concussive blast. The news stations cut away from their somber montages of the 7 to play the live interview on a continuous loop. Social media shattered its own records. At City Watcher, did anyone else just see this? 3 randos just stopped a garbage truck with their bare hands minds lightning. Who are they? New Heroes NYC. At Vought Fanatic 99, OMG, did you hear their interview? They want to help Homelander. I'm literally crying right now. God sends angels when we need them most. Loudly baby superhero male. At Speed Reader, that blonde guy, Felix, he's faster than A-Train, I said what I said. The footage doesn't lie. Look at the frame rate. Felix is the new Flash. At Justice for All, Julian stopping that truck with his mind, that was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Vought needs to sign these guys immediately. At Lightning Boy Fan, Elias just fried an engine block with 2 fingers and looked like a Vogue model doing it. Eyes high. The internet, in its infinite wisdom, did what it always did. It branded them. Within 2 hours, Julian, Felix, and Elias were trending worldwide under new monikers, coined by the viral comments. Justice, Flash, Elektra. On a major cable news network, a panel of anchors sat around a desk, the footage of the rescue playing behind them. "It's a miracle, simply put," the lead anchor said, shaking his head in disbelief. On a day where America felt it had lost its shield, 3 young men step out of the shadows. They saw people in danger and they acted. And their humility, a female co-anchor added, her hand over her heart. To immediately pledge their support to Homelander, to want to learn from Vought rather than seek independent fame. It shows the kind of moral fiber we desperately need to rebuild the Seven. The question on everyone's mind, the political analyst chimed in, is whether Stan, Edgar, and Vought International are watching. Because if they are looking at the future of American security. They are looking at the cure for the nation's broken heart. P.S. The novel is already completed on Patreon. If you want to read the whole story at once, there are 10 advanced chapters available. www.patreon.com/drrajnovel. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 95, Chapter 95, Stan Edgar 1, Perspective, Arian's Clone. The townhouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan was a fortress of silent security. Stan Edgar's private residence, a multi-story townhouse clad in classical brownstone, was the epicenter of that fortress. The security apparatus, protecting the CEO of Vought International, was absolute. Seismic sensors beneath the sidewalks, biometric locks on reinforced steel doors, thermal scanners sweeping the alleyways, and a dedicated team of Voughts, elite private military contractors, sitting in a hardened command center down the street. To a squad of highly trained special forces, or even to the majority of the Seven, this house was impenetrable without triggering a silent alarm that would summon a corporate army in less than 2 minutes. I stood on the rooftop of a neighboring building, looking across the narrow gap at Edgar's slate roof. Size alteration Tier 1. I compressed my mass, pushing the boundaries of my own atomic structure, shrinking down to the absolute limit. 1 micrometer. The laser grids were canyon-wide gaps of red light above me. The thermal sensors could not distinguish my infinitesimally small heat signature from the ambient friction of the air molecules. I locked onto the spatial coordinates of the master bedroom on the 3rd floor of the townhouse. Teleportation Tier 1. Snap. I materialized in the air, drifting downward like a single particle of dust, landing softly on the thick fibers of an imported wool rug. The room was pitch black, the heavy blackout curtains drawn tightly against the city lights. The only sound was the steady breathing of the man in the king-sized bed. I released my hold on the size alteration. I grew in total silence, the air molecules parting seamlessly around my expanding form until I stood at my full height at the foot of the bed. Stan Edgar slept on his back. His hands were resting neatly on his stomach, resting over the pristine white duvet. Even in sleep, the man looked like he was calculating quarterly margins. He was the architect of Vought's absolute dominance, a man who viewed Homelander as a volatile financial asset to be managed. I walked to the side of the bed. My footsteps made no sound. I raised my right hand and gently placed my palm flat against his forehead. Telepathy Tier 1. I kicked the door to his mind open and stepped inside. The sheer volume of information was staggering. Stan Edgar's mind was a meticulously organized labyrinth of corporate secrets, geopolitical blackmail, and decades of ruthless strategy. I absorbed the passwords to the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I took the access codes to the deepest sub-levels of Vought Tower. I watched his memories of Jonah Vogelbaum, of the original Compound V formula, of the exact location and refinement process of the proprietary catalyst that made the serum stable. I watched his conversations with Homelander, feeling the precise mixture of clinical detachment and underlying fear he harbored for the Golden God. I absorbed his cadence, his vocabulary, the specific way he steepled his fingers when he lied, the exact measure of his stride. Edgar groaned softly in his sleep, a slight frown creasing his forehead as his subconscious registered the invasive trauma of the psychic extraction. His eyes fluttered beneath their lids. He was beginning to wake up. I moved my left hand, hovering at an inch directly over the center of his chest. Cryokinesis Tier 1. The biological processes of his body locked into permanent stillness in a fraction of a microsecond. His blood crystallized into solid veins of red ice. His heart froze mid-beat, cracking into brittle shards within his chest cavity. The flesh of his face turned a translucent white, a spiderweb of frozen capillaries blooming just beneath the surface. An eerie crackle echoed in the silent room as the moisture in the air around him froze and fell like diamond dust onto the duvet. I placed my hand on his frozen shoulder. I accessed the dimensional inventory I shared with my original host. Pop! The frozen corpse of Stan Edgar vanished, leaving a perfectly smooth depression in the expensive mattress. I closed my eyes and focused on the vast reservoir of genetic data and memory I had just acquired. Shapeshifting Tier 1. My bones snapped and cracked, dissolving into a fluid state before rapidly reforming. My spine compressed, shedding an inch of height. The melanin in my skin shifted, darkening, aging, weathering under the invisible weight of decades of stress. My hair receded, thinning and turning a distinguished salt and pepper gray. My vocal cords tightened, reshaping themselves to match the resonant, gravelly baritone of the man I had just erased. The transition was agonizingly precise, rewriting my very DNA to match his. I opened my eyes. I walked over to the full-length mirror standing in the corner of the room. Stan Edgar looked back at me. The posture was impeccable. The expression was a mask of cold superiority. I lifted a hand and adjusted the collar of the silk pajamas I had manifested to match the ones the corpse had been wearing. Vought, I whispered, the voice rolling out of my throat with perfect accuracy, is mine. I walked back to the bed. I pulled the duvet back, slid between the cool sheets, folded my hands neatly over my stomach, and closed my eyes to sleep. Vought Tower, CEO's office the next morning. The view from the 99th floor of Vought Tower was spectacular. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk, dressed in one of Edgar's bespoke charcoal suits. I had spent the morning seamlessly navigating Edgar's routine. I had greeted his driver with the exact ratio of aloofness and professionalism he expected. I had bypassed the executive assistants with a curt nod. I was currently reviewing the morning stock reports. Just as Edgar had predicted in the bunker, the stock had skyrocketed. The narrative of the Seven's heroic sacrifice had captured the national zeitgeist. Vought was more profitable today than it had been a week ago. 3 rhythmic knocks echoed against my office door. Enter, I called out, my voice the perfect embodiment of Stan Edgar. The door opened, and Graves walked in. The director of intelligence looked haggard. The stress of managing the cover-up of the Appalachian massacre and the sudden appearance of 3 new public sups was clearly taking its toll. He closed the door securely behind him and stood at attention in front of the desk. "Good morning, Mr. Edgar," Graves said, approaching the desk. "Sir, we have had our entire analytics division tearing through every database on the planet," Graves said, opening a tablet. "Facial recognition, biometric tracking, financial records, birth certificates. Their public aliases are Julian, Felix, and Elias, but beyond that, nothing." "Nothing?" I asked, raising an eyebrow exactly as Edgar would. "Their backgrounds are completely clean, sir," Graves said, a hint of genuine panic bleeding into his voice. "It's as if they popped into existence yesterday morning. We have 0 record of them ever being injected with Compound V, and they aren't in any of our registries. P.S. We just need 28 more Power Stones for another bonus chapter. P.S. The novel is already completed on Patreon. If you want to read the whole story at once, there are 10 advanced chapters available. www.patreon.com/drrajnovel. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. Power Stone Progress Update, 72-100. All right, legends, that's it for today. If you're ready for the next chapter, smash that like button and flood the comments right now. Remember, we've got 3 days to prove this story needs to continue. Subscribe so you don't miss the drop, and I'll meet you in the next audiobook.